This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Even typing this makes my hands shake. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or any of that stuff. At least I didn't before last October. I live alone in a small house about 20 minutes outside Portland. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means I spend a lot of time at home. My cat Shadow has been my constant companion for the past 4 years. She's a sleek black cat with bright yellow eyes who I adopted from the shelter when she was just a kitten. She's always been affectionate, almost dog-like in how she follows me around the house. At least, that's how she used to be. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed. I remember it specifically because I had a deadline for a client project that day. I was up early, around 6 a.m., working at my desk, when I noticed Shadow sitting on the windowsill, completely rigid, staring outside. This wasn't totally unusual. Cats watch birds all the time, right? But there was something off about how still she was. Her tail wasn't even twitching. "Shadow," I called, but she didn't acknowledge me. I got up and walked over to see what had caught her attention so completely. There was nothing there, just the empty yard and the fog hanging over the trees. I reached out to pet her, something I'd done 1,000 times before. That's when it happened. She whipped around so fast I barely saw her move, her back arched impossibly high, fur standing on end, and she let out this sound, not a hiss or a growl, but something deeper, almost like a human voice attempting to mimic a cat. Then she slashed at my hand. The scratches were deep. Blood immediately started dripping onto the floor. But what freaked me out more than the attack was what I saw in that split second when she turned. It was like her face shifted. Her eyes seemed too wide. Her mouth stretched in a way that a cat's mouth shouldn't be able to stretch. It happened so fast I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I backed away, clutching my bleeding hand. "What the hell, Shadow?" I said. She jumped down from the windowsill and strolled casually across the room like nothing had happened. But when she glanced back at me, I swear there was something in her eyes that had never been there before. Something calculating. I cleaned and bandaged my hand, telling myself that she must have seen something outside that spooked her. Cats are weird sometimes, right? I tried to focus on work, but I kept feeling like I was being watched. Every time I looked up, Shadow was there, watching me from some corner of the room with an unblinking stare. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching. Shadow usually sleeps at the foot of my bed, but she wasn't there. The scratching was coming from the living room. I grabbed my phone for light and walked out there, expecting to find her at the front door wanting to go outside. Instead, I found her sitting in the center of the room, completely still, staring at me. The scratching sound continued even though she wasn't moving. It seemed to be coming from inside the walls. "Shadow?" I whispered. She blinked once, very slowly. I told myself it was just mice in the walls. My house is pretty old. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I felt like something was watching me from the darkness. The next morning, Shadow was gone. This wasn't completely unusual. She had a cat door and would sometimes go out hunting. What was unusual was what I found on my front porch, a dead bird, meticulously arranged in the center of the welcome mat. Not just dead, but taken apart, methodically, organs placed in a neat little row beside the body. I've had cats bring me presents before, but never like this. I cleaned it up, feeling nauseated. When I went back inside, Shadow was sitting on the kitchen counter, watching me. She hadn't come in through the cat door. I would have heard it. It was like she just appeared. "Where did you come from?" I asked. She just stared, and I noticed she had no blood on her fur. None at all, despite the mess outside. I tried to go about my day normally. I had client calls and work to do. But Shadow's behavior got increasingly strange. She would disappear for an hour, then suddenly be right behind me when I turned around. She stopped eating from her bowl, but every morning there would be a new gift on the porch. Birds, mice, once even a rabbit, all dissected with that same disturbing precision. My sleep got worse. I'd wake up feeling like something was sitting on my chest, but when I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. The scratching in the walls continued every night, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like whispers. I stopped answering calls from friends, stopped going out. I couldn't leave Shadow alone in the house. It felt dangerous somehow, but I also became afraid to be alone with her. 5 days after the first incident, I was sitting on my couch trying to watch TV when Shadow jumped onto the coffee table. She knocked over my water glass deliberately, making direct eye contact with me as she did it. "Cut it out," I said, reaching to push her off the table. That's when she attacked for real. She latched onto my arm with her teeth and claws, biting down so hard I felt her teeth hit bone. I yelled and tried to shake her off, but she held on, making that same unnatural sound from before, and her face. Oh God, her face. This time I saw it clearly, her features contorted, almost melting and reshaping themselves. Her eyes grew wider, more human-like. Her mouth stretched too wide, revealing rows of teeth that no cat should have. I managed to throw her off and ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My arm was a mess of blood and torn flesh. I ran it under water, trying not to pass out from pain and fear. Shadow scratched at the door, that inhuman growl continuing without pause for breath. I sat on the bathroom floor, back against the door for hours. The scratching eventually stopped. When I finally got the courage to open the door, Shadow was gone. I searched the whole house, but she had vanished. I knew I needed help. My arm was badly infected within hours, swollen and hot to the touch. I drove myself to urgent care, where they cleaned the wounds, gave me antibiotics and a tetanus shot, and asked a lot of questions about what kind of animal had attacked me. I lied and said it was a stray cat I'd tried to help. When I got home, Shadow was waiting on the porch, just sitting there, looking normal, like my sweet cat again. She meowed softly when she saw me, and I felt a surge of doubt about everything that had happened. Had I been having some kind of breakdown? Was I working too much? I cautiously let her in, and she rubbed against my legs like she always used to. That night, she slept at the foot of my bed, and there were no strange noises. I actually got some sleep for the first time in days. The next morning, I woke up feeling better. Maybe I had just been overtired and imagining things. I decided to take Shadow to the vet just to be safe. Maybe she had rabies or some other illness that was affecting her behavior. Dr. Hartley had been Shadow's vet since I adopted her. She's this no-nonsense woman in her 50s who always wears her gray hair in a tight bun. She examined Shadow thoroughly while I waited anxiously in the exam room. "Physically, she's perfectly healthy," Dr. Hartley said finally. "Good weight, clear eyes and ears, strong heartbeat. What kind of behavioral changes have you noticed?" I hesitated. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding completely insane? I ended up downplaying it, mentioning the aggression and the weird staring, but leaving out the part where my cat's face transformed into something not cat. Dr. Hartley frowned. "Sudden aggression can sometimes indicate pain or a neurological issue. but I'm not seeing any signs of either. Let's do some blood work just to be sure there's nothing internal going on." While a tech took Shadow to draw blood, Dr. Hartley asked me more questions. Any changes at home? New people? Different food? Had I noticed any other strange behaviors? Something about her intensity made me feel like she might actually believe me if I told her everything. So I did. I told her about the face changing, the dead animals arranged in patterns, the scratching in the walls, all of it. I expected her to refer me to a psychiatrist, but instead she went very still. "How long has this been happening?" she asked quietly. "About a week," I said. She nodded slowly. "Wait here." She left the room for what felt like forever. When she came back, she was alone. "Where's Shadow?" I asked. "Safe," she said. "For now. Mr. Clark, Jamie, I need you to listen carefully. I believe what you're experiencing is real." My stomach dropped. Somehow, having someone believe me was almost worse than being told I was crazy. "What's happening to her?" I asked. "It's not what's happening to her," Dr. Hartley said. "It's what she is, or rather, what's using her form." She explained that her grandmother had been what some might call a hedge witch, someone who practiced old forms of folk magic and healing. She'd kept detailed journals of supernatural encounters. One of these journals described creatures that could take the form of cats, but weren't cats at all. "They're called changelings," she said. "They're ancient entities that feed on fear and chaos. They often choose cats as vessels because cats can move between homes easily and are trusted." I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "You're telling me my cat is possessed?" "No, I'm telling you your cat might not be your cat anymore." She lowered her voice. "When did you last see Shadow's face change?" "This morning," I said. "Just briefly, when I was putting her in the carrier." Dr. Hartley swore under her breath. "We need to go to your house, now." "What about Shadow?" "That's not Shadow in the back room," she said grimly. "When my tech went to draw blood, the carrier was empty. The latch was still closed from the outside. My blood went cold. Then how? They can move through shadows," she said. "It's probably already back at your house." I didn't want to believe her. This was insane. But I remembered the way Shadow would disappear and reappear, how she seemed to get into rooms with closed doors. And I knew somehow that Dr. Hartley was right. We drove to my house separately. The whole way there, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Shadow sitting in my back seat. When we pulled up to my house, I immediately knew something was wrong. My front door was slightly ajar, even though I was certain I'd locked it. "Wait," Dr. Hartley said, grabbing my arm as I moved toward the house. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass bottle filled with what looked like salt. "Take this. If you see it, throw this at it. It won't kill it, but it will slow it down." We approached the house cautiously. The door swung open wider as we got closer, though there was no breeze. Inside, the house was dark, despite it being midday. The blinds were all drawn, and there was a smell, like wet fur and something rotting. "Shadow?" I called out, immediately regretting it. A soft meow came from the kitchen. Shadow, or what looked like Shadow, was sitting on the counter, grooming herself casually. Dr. Hartley tensed beside me. "That's not your cat," she whispered. As if it heard her, Shadow stopped grooming and looked up. Her yellow eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. And then, slowly, her face began to change. It was like watching wax melt and reform. Her eyes widened, growing rounder, more human-like. Her mouth stretched into what I can only describe as a grin, revealing too many teeth, sharper and longer than cat teeth should be. Her whole body seemed to expand slightly. her limbs elongating. I was frozen in terror, but Dr. Hartley pushed me aside and threw her bottle of salt at the creature. It screeched, a sound that no cat could make, like metal tearing, and jumped off the counter, darting into the shadows of the living room. "We need to work fast," Dr. Hartley said, pulling more items from her bag. "It will recover quickly." She instructed me to close all the blinds and doors, blocking any exits. Then she began drawing a circle on my living room floor with what looked like chalk but smelled strongly of herbs. "What exactly are we doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. "A banishing ritual," she said without looking up. "It's old magic, from my grandmother's book. It should force the entity out of our realm." "Should? It's the best chance we have." She handed me a candle. "Light this and place it at the north point of the circle." I did as she asked, then helped her place 3 more candles at what I assumed were the east, south, and west points. She placed small bowls of different herbs and substances at intervals around the circle. "Where is it now?" I whispered, peering into the shadowy corners of my house. "Watching," she said. "Waiting. It knows what we're doing." As if on cue, the scratching sound started again, not from the walls this time, but from the ceiling right above us. Plaster dust drifted down onto the circle. Dr. Hartley ignored it, continuing her preparations. She pulled out an old leather-bound book and opened it to a marked page. "When I start the ritual, it will try to stop us," she warned. "No matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, don't break the circle. Understand?" I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. She began reading from the book in a language I didn't recognize. The candle flames grew taller, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. The scratching overhead intensified, and I could hear that not-quite cat growl coming from somewhere in the room. Then the whispers started. Dozens of voices, some sounding like people I knew, some completely foreign. They seemed to be coming from all around us, saying things I couldn't quite make out, but that filled me with dread nonetheless. Dr. Hartley's voice grew louder, more commanding. The candles flared even higher, and the air in the room felt thick, charged with electricity. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned to see shadow, or the thing that looked like shadow, stalking around the edge of the circle. But with each step, it changed. It grew larger, its form becoming more amorphous, less cat-like. Its eyes multiplied, yellow orbs appearing across its shifting body. Its mouth, or mouths, gaped open, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to flee, but I remembered Dr. Hartley's warning and forced myself to stay within the circle. The creature circled us faster, its form becoming more monstrous with each pass. The whispers grew to shouts, and the house itself seemed to shake. Dr. Hartley reached the crescendo of the ritual, her voice ringing out clear and powerful above the chaos. She threw something into the center of the circle, a mixture of herbs and what looked like bone fragments. There was a flash of light so bright I had to shield my eyes. The creature screeched, a sound so loud and terrible I felt like my eardrums might burst. When I looked again, it had reared up, towering over us. It was no longer even remotely cat-like, just a writhing mass of shadows with too many eyes and mouths, reaching for us with elongated limbs that ended in wicked claws. Dr. Hartley shouted the final words of the ritual and slammed her hand down on the book. The candles exploded into columns of flame that reached the ceiling. The creature's scream cut off abruptly, and its form seemed to collapse in on itself, shrinking and contorting until it was just a small, dark shape on the floor. Then, before our eyes, it crumbled away like ash, scattering into nothing as if blown by a wind I couldn't feel. The silence that followed was absolute. The candles had gone out, leaving us in the dim light filtering through the blinds. Dr. Hartley was breathing hard, looking as shocked as I felt. "Is it gone?" I whispered. She nodded slowly. "I think so." We searched the house thoroughly, but found no sign of the creature. No scratches on the walls, no shadow. Neither my real cat nor the thing that had taken her form. Dr. Hartley left me her grandmother's book and made me promise to call her if anything strange happened again. But it's been months now, and there's been nothing. No scratching, no whispers, no dead animals on my porch. Sometimes I think I imagined the whole thing. That would be easier to accept than the alternative. That there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that can wear familiar faces and move through shadows. I still haven't gotten another pet. I don't think I ever will. And even though Dr. Hartley assures me the entity is gone, I can't help checking dark corners before I enter a room, or feeling uneasy when I catch a movement in my peripheral vision. Because the worst part isn't what happened, it's not knowing when it started. How long was that thing pretending to be shadow before I noticed? How long was I living with something not cat, loving it, petting it, letting it sleep on my bed? And if I didn't notice when my own cat was replaced by something else, what else might I be missing? I need to get this off my chest after all these years. I've never been the type to believe in monsters, cryptids, or anything supernatural. I was a history teacher, for God's sake. I dealt in facts, evidence, and the documented past. But what happened to me and my friend Dave in Shoshone National Forest back in 2003 defies any rational explanation I've been able to come up with, and it's haunted me ever since. I retired from teaching in 2002 after 35 years at Denver East High School. I was 71. My wife had passed 2 years prior, and I figured it was time to enjoy whatever years I had left. I bought myself a modest RV. Nothing fancy, just a 24-foot Winnebago that would let me see some of the country I'd spent decades teaching about, but rarely visited myself. My old college buddy Dave Whitman and I had been planning a camping trip once I retired. We'd been friends since our freshman year at CU Boulder back in the 60s. Dave was always the adventurous one, dragging me out of the library to go hiking or fishing. After college, he went into forestry while I went into teaching, but we stayed close all those years. The week before we were set to leave, I visited my father at his nursing home. Dad was 93 then, still sharp as a tack mentally, even if his body was failing him. When I told him about our planned trip to Wyoming, specifically the areas around Shoshone National Forest, his expression changed. Dad had worked as a land surveyor across Wyoming and Montana in the 1940s, and he knew those areas well. "Be careful up there, Mickey," he said, using my childhood nickname. "Stick to the marked trails and campgrounds." When I pressed him on why, he just shook his head and said some places weren't meant for people to stay too long. I brushed it off as the ramblings of an old man, but looking back, I wish I'd listened more carefully. Dave and I set out on July 15, 2003. The drive from Denver to Wyoming was uneventful, just catching up, reminiscing about old times, planning our fishing spots. We reached the forest by mid-afternoon and decided to find a spot a bit off the regular camping areas. Dave knew a place from his forestry days that wasn't on the tourist maps, a small clearing about a half-mile from one of the access roads. As soon as we arrived at the spot, something felt wrong. The area was beautiful, a small clearing surrounded by dense pine forest, with a view of the mountains in the distance. But there was this heaviness in the air that I can't quite explain. Even Dave seemed to feel it. He kept looking over his shoulder as we set up camp, something I'd never seen him do before. "Place seems different than I remember," he muttered as we finished setting up. "Maybe it's just been too long." That first evening we cooked dinner on the portable grill outside the RV. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The silence was what got to me first. No birds, no insects, just dead quiet except for the occasional breeze through the pines. In my years of camping, I'd never experienced a forest so utterly silent. Dave tried to lighten the mood by breaking out a bottle of whiskey, and we sat in our folding chairs swapping stories until it got dark. But neither of us could completely shake that feeling of unease. Around 10 p.m. we decided to turn in, Dave taking the pull-out sofa while I took the small bedroom in the back of the RV. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first heard it, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was just Dave getting up to use the bathroom, but then I realized the sounds were coming from outside, rustling, like something moving around the campsite. My first thought was bears. We'd been careful with our food, but you never know. Then came the growling, low, guttural, but not quite right for a bear or any animal I recognized. It had this strange cadence to it, almost like speech, but not quite. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, and heard Dave moving in the main cabin. "Michael," he whispered through the thin door. "You hearing this?" Before I could answer, there was another sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Not human laughter, at least not entirely. It was high-pitched, almost hysterical, but with this guttural quality underneath that no human throat could produce. It was the sound of something enjoying itself, something that found our fear amusing. I joined Dave in the main cabin, and we both just stood there in the dark, listening. The footsteps, because that's what they clearly were now, circled the RV slowly. Whatever it was would occasionally bump against the side, not hard enough to rock the vehicle, but deliberately, like it was testing our shelter. "What the hell is that?" Dave whispered. I could barely make out his face in the darkness, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. "Probably just some local kids messing with us," I said, not believing it for a second. The footsteps didn't sound like multiple people, just one something, moving with an odd loping gait. This went on for maybe 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the sounds. We waited, tense and alert, until the first light of dawn started to filter through the windows. Neither of us had moved to turn on a light or look outside, operating on some primal instinct that told us staying quiet and out of sight was safer. When it was finally light enough, we ventured outside. The clearing looked exactly as we'd left it. Chairs still by the cold fire pit, cooler still on the picnic table. But then Dave called me over to the other side of the RV. "Look at this," he said, voice tight. Long scratches ran down the side of my Winnebago, from about 6 feet high down to the bottom. They were deep enough to gouge the paint and metal underneath. Not random animal scratches either. They were in sets of 4, evenly spaced, like fingers or claws had been deliberately dragged down the side. "Bear," I suggested weakly. Dave shook his head. "Bears don't stand on 2 legs long enough to make marks like these, and they don't play with their food. We probably should have packed up and left right then. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But instead, we spent the day fishing at a nearby stream, deliberately staying away from the campsite and trying to convince ourselves that we'd overreacted to some perfectly explainable forest sounds. "Probably a mountain lion," Dave said as we cast our lines into the clear water. "They can make weird sounds sometimes." I nodded, letting myself believe it because the alternative was too unsettling. By afternoon, with the sun high and warm on our backs, last night's fear seemed almost silly. We decided to stay one more night before moving on to another spot. That was a mistake. The second night started much like the first. We had dinner, talked by the fire, but turned in earlier, both of us tired from the poor sleep the night before. I took a sleeping pill, hoping to get some proper rest. The pill must have knocked me out good, because what woke me wasn't subtle noises, but Dave shaking me roughly by the shoulder, his face pale in the dim light from his flashlight. "It's back," he whispered, "and it's trying to get in." Now I could hear it. Something was systematically testing every door and window of the RV. The door handle jiggled. The emergency exit at the rear was being pushed against. Whatever was out there, it was intelligent enough to understand how our shelter worked and was looking for a way inside. The laughter came again, louder this time, closer to the window near my bed. I could hear breathing, heavy, wet breathing, like something with fluid in its lungs. The window was covered with a blind, but I could see a shadow through it, darker than the night outside. Then it spoke. I'll never forget that voice as long as I live. It wasn't English, wasn't any language I recognized, but it had structure and intent behind it. The closest I can describe it is like someone trying to imitate human speech with vocal cords that weren't designed for it, guttural clicks and moans that somehow formed patterns. Dave and I retreated to the center of the RV, away from any windows or doors. We had a hunting knife and a small canister of bear spray between us, laughably inadequate against whatever was out there, but it was all we had. The thing circled and tested our defenses for what felt like hours. Occasionally it would go quiet for a few minutes, and we'd think maybe it had left, only for it to slam against the side of the RV with enough force to rock it slightly. Each time, that horrible laughter would follow. Toward dawn, it seemed to lose interest. The noises grew more distant and eventually stopped altogether. We waited until full daylight before daring to look outside. What we found turned my stomach. All around the RV were footprints, not animal tracks, not quite human either. They were elongated, with what looked like 5 toes, but the proportions were all wrong. Some were over 15 inches long, deeply pressed into the dirt as if whatever made them was incredibly heavy. Worse was the substance smeared on parts of the RV, a dark, viscous fluid that stank of rotting meat and something else, something chemical and acrid. It was smeared in patterns that seemed deliberate, but made no sense to us, curved lines and shapes that hurt my eyes to look at for too long. "We're leaving. Now." Dave's voice brooked no argument, and I had none to give. We packed up in record time, not even bothering to properly stow everything, just throwing our gear into the RV haphazardly. As we pulled away, I glanced in my side mirror, and for a split second, just a flash really, I thought I saw movement at the tree line. Something tall, something watching us go. We drove straight to the nearest ranger station, about 40 minutes away. The ranger on duty was a man named John Hawkins, mid-50s, weathered face that had seen plenty of Wyoming winters. When we told him what happened, I expected skepticism, maybe even laughter. Instead, he got very quiet and asked us to describe exactly where we'd been camping. After we gave him the location, he nodded slowly. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said finally, "especially in that area." "What do you mean?" Dave asked. "What is it?" Ranger Hawkins looked uncomfortable. "The local Shoshone have stories about something they call the Jaeger. Not an animal, not a man either. Something that lives in the deepest parts of the forest." He paused. Most of us figured it was just old legends, meant to keep people from wandering too far off trail. But you don't think so anymore? I prompted when he fell silent. Let's just say I've worked these forests for 27 years, and there are things I can't explain. Places where even the wildlife won't go. Sounds at night that don't match any known species. He shrugged. I'm not saying I believe in monsters, but there's a reason I don't camp in certain parts of this forest anymore. He took our report, though I could tell he was being careful about what he wrote down. Official forms don't have boxes for stalked by unknown cryptid. He advised us to move to one of the established campgrounds if we wanted to stay in the area, but frankly, we'd had enough. We drove straight back to Denver that day, barely speaking during the long drive. Life went back to normal after that. Dave and I still met up for beers occasionally, but we never talked much about what happened. It was like we had this unspoken agreement to file it away in that part of the brain reserved for things too strange to process. 5 years passed. Then in August 2008, I got a call from Dave's daughter. Dave had gone missing during a solo camping trip in the Shoshone National Forest. I couldn't believe he'd gone back there alone. When the police asked if I had any idea where he might have gone, I hesitated before telling them about our experience. As I expected, they didn't take it seriously, but they did take the specific location I gave them. 2 days into the search, with no sign of Dave, I couldn't just sit at home anymore. I drove up to Wyoming, checked into a motel near the search headquarters, and offered my help. They were polite, but clear that civilians would only get in the way. On the third night, I made a decision that was either the bravest or stupidest of my life. I took my flashlight, my revolver. I'd started carrying one after our experience, some water and basic supplies, and I drove to the area where we'd camped 5 years earlier. I knew the general search grid didn't include that specific spot. It was too far from where Dave had told his family he was going. I parked at the access road and hiked in around midnight. The forest felt the same, that unnatural silence, that sense of being watched. But this time, instead of feeling afraid, I was angry. Angry that whatever this thing was had probably taken my friend. Angry that no one would believe me. Angry that I'd spent 5 years trying to convince myself it had all been in our heads. I reached our old camping spot and just stood there, breathing hard from the hike and from fear. "I know you're out there," I called out, my voice sounding pitifully small in the vast darkness. "You took my friend. I want him back." The response wasn't immediate. I stood there for maybe 15 minutes, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line, jumping at every small sound. Then I heard it, that same horrible, not quite human laughter, distant but clear in the still night air. I'd like to say I bravely set off toward the sound, but the truth is, I almost ran back to my car. Only the thought of Dave, possibly still alive somewhere, kept me moving forward. I followed the sounds deeper into the forest, well off any trail, using my flashlight sparingly to avoid alerting whatever was out there to my exact position. The laughter led me to a rocky outcropping with what looked like a cave entrance. The smell hit me first, that same rotting meat stench from 5 years ago, but stronger, almost overwhelming. I covered my nose with my shirt and approached cautiously, gun drawn now. The cave entrance was low, forcing me to crouch. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pushed forward, playing my flashlight over the rough stone walls. The passage widened after about 20 feet, opening into a larger chamber. What I saw there will stay with me until the day I die. Dave was there, alive but barely conscious, propped against the far wall. Around him were bones, Animal bones, yes, but unmistakably human ones too. And standing over him, its back to me, was the Jaeger. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a body covered in matted dark fur. Its limbs were wrong, too long, too jointed in the wrong places. When it turned at the sound of my gasping, I saw its face, and my mind still struggles to process what I saw. It was like someone had tried to make a human face without ever seeing one properly. The features in approximately the right places, but distorted, elongated. Its eyes reflected my flashlight like an animal's, but they held an intelligence that was terrifyingly aware. It made that chittering, clicking speech sound again, cocking its head at me like a curious bird. Then it smiled, showing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp for any herbivore or even normal predator. I didn't think. I fired. The first shot hit it in the chest, causing it to stagger but not fall. It let out a howl that was part pain, part rage, and rushed at me with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for something its size. I emptied the revolver, each shot finding its mark, but it kept coming until the final bullet caught it in what passed for its throat. It collapsed just feet from me, that horrible face frozen in a grimace that was somehow still amused, as if this was all part of some game. I didn't wait to see if it would get up again. I rushed to Dave, who was dehydrated and injured but alive, and somehow managed to half carry, half drag him out of that cave and back toward the access road. We were found the next morning by search teams, Dave nearly unconscious, and me babbling about the creature. They sent people to the cave based on my directions, but they reported finding nothing. No creature, no bones, nothing but empty stone chambers. The official report listed Dave as having fallen and hit his head while hiking off trail, with me finding him by chance. Dave recovered physically, but he's never been the same. He moved to Arizona shortly after, and we rarely speak now. When we do, we never mention what happened. The last time I saw him, though, he pulled me aside at his daughter's wedding and whispered, "Do you think it was the only one?" I had no answer then, and I have none now. I'm 82 years old now, and I don't go camping anymore. Sometimes at night, especially when it's quiet, I think I can hear that laughter in the distance. And sometimes when I'm driving on lonely stretches of highway near forests, I scan the tree line, half expecting to see a too-tall figure watching me pass. I still don't know what the Jaeger is or where it came from. All I know is that it exists, it hunts, and it's intelligent enough to play with its food before it eats. And I know that even now, 11 years later, I still wake up some nights with my heart pounding, convinced I can smell that rotting stench in my bedroom, wondering if one day I'll turn on the light to find that distorted face smiling at me from the darkness. I still can't sleep right. It's been 4 years since what happened at Oakmount Creek, but I find myself checking the windows at night and keeping a baseball bat next to my bed. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what we saw. Summer 2019 was supposed to be our celebration. I'd finally graduated from college, and my girlfriend Jennifer and I planned a camping trip with our best friends Travis and Sadie. Just a simple weekend in the woods at a state park about 2 hours from Birmingham where we all lived. Nothing crazy, just hiking, swimming, and hanging around a campfire. That was the plan anyway. The weird stuff started before we even left. My dad, who's never been the overly protective type, got super serious when I told him where we were heading. He got this look on his face I hadn't seen since my mom died. He disappeared into the garage and came back with this old flare gun. "Take this with you," he said, handing it to me along with 2 flares, just in case. When I asked what I'd need it for, he just shook his head. Probably nothing. But that area, Just keep it handy. Don't go wandering off the main trails after dark." I laughed it off, but took the flare gun to humor him. I remember stuffing it at the bottom of my backpack, thinking I'd never use it. We left early Friday morning in Travis's SUV. The drive was beautiful, winding through rural Alabama, windows down, music blasting. Jennifer sat in the back with me, her head on my shoulder, while Travis drove and Sadie navigated. Everything felt perfect. We arrived around noon and hiked about a mile to our spot, a clearing near Oakmount Creek that Travis had camped at with his dad years ago. The site was gorgeous. Tall pines, a babbling creek nearby, and enough open space for our 2 tents. But from the moment we started setting up, something felt off. I can't explain it exactly. The air felt heavy somehow, like when a thunderstorm is about to hit, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Jennifer felt it too. I caught her staring into the trees several times, like she was looking for something. "You feel that?" she whispered, while Travis and Sadie were collecting firewood. "Feel what?" I asked, hammering in a tent stake. "Like we're being watched." I looked around. The forest was peaceful, birds chirping, squirrels darting between trees. Normal forest stuff. "It's just nerves," I said. "First day in the woods." By sunset, we had camp set up, a fire going, and were cooking hot dogs on sticks. Travis broke out some beers, and we started to relax. The weird feeling faded as we joked around and planned our hike for the next day. The creek was supposed to lead to a small waterfall about 2 miles upstream, perfect for swimming. After dinner, Jennifer wanted to check out the creek before it got completely dark. I grabbed a flashlight, and we walked the short path down to the water. It was a beautiful spot. Clear water running over smooth stones, the last sunlight filtering through the trees. That's when it happened. The sound just stopped, all at once. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, nothing but the sound of the water. It was so sudden that Jennifer grabbed my arm. "Michael, what's wrong with the birds?" she whispered. I remember feeling the hair stand up on my neck. The silence was unnatural, wrong, and that's when I felt it stronger than ever. We were being watched. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight into the trees across the creek. Nothing moved, but the shadows seemed deeper than they should have been. "Let's go back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We practically jogged back to camp. Travis and Sadie were still sitting by the fire, but they looked tense. "You guys notice anything weird just now?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Travis nodded. "Everything went quiet all of a sudden. Happens sometimes in the woods, but..." He didn't finish the sentence. We huddled closer to the fire as the darkness settled completely around us. Travis started telling stories his dad had shared about these woods. One in particular stuck with me. He said his dad had been hunting here years ago and saw something through his rifle scope that he couldn't explain. A tall, thin figure standing among the trees, watching him. It had looked almost human except for its proportions and what appeared to be antlers or branches extending from its head. "Dad said he packed up and never hunted in this part of the woods again," Travis finished. "Always told me to be careful camping here." I remembered my father's warning and the flare gun buried in my pack. I almost went to dig it out then, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. We went to bed early, Jennifer and me in one tent, Travis and Sadie in the other. I lay awake for a long time, listening. The normal sounds of the forest had returned, but now they seemed too loud, too deliberate. Jennifer fell asleep, curled against me, but I kept staring at the tent ceiling. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke suddenly in the darkness. Something was pressing against the side of our tent. Not like an animal sniffing around, this was deliberate. A large shape was pushing slowly against the fabric, creating an indentation that moved along the side. My heart nearly stopped when I realized what it looked like. A massive hand with impossibly long fingers feeling its way along the tent. I reached for my flashlight, trying not to wake Jennifer, and pointed it at the shape. The tent wall illuminated, showing the clear outline of what I can only describe as a hand, but much too large to be human. The fingers were unnaturally long and thin. When the light hit it, the shape instantly withdrew. I heard something large move quickly away from the tent, branches snapping under its weight. I didn't sleep another minute that night. Jennifer woke at some point and asked what was wrong, but I just told her I'd heard an animal outside. No need to scare her more than necessary, but I kept the flashlight on until dawn. At first light, I was the first one out of the tent. The others soon joined me, and I could tell none of us had slept well. We made coffee over a new fire, and I suggested checking out the creek in daylight. No one mentioned anything strange from the night before. The creek looked different in the morning sun, less magical, more ordinary. We walked along the bank, planning to follow it to the waterfall. That's when Sadie pointed at the mud near the water's edge. "What are those?" We all gathered around to look. Pressed into the soft mud were footprints, but not like any animal tracks I'd ever seen. They were massive, easily twice the size of my boot, with what looked like 5 long toes splayed wide. They weren't bear tracks, weren't deer, nothing I could identify. "Maybe someone's messing with us," Travis suggested, but his voice cracked, like wearing some crazy fake feet or something. I knelt down to look closer and noticed something that made my stomach drop. The stride length between the prints was huge, at least 7 feet apart. Whatever made these was tall, unnaturally tall. We followed the tracks along the creek until they disappeared into the underbrush. No one wanted to follow them further. Without discussing it, we all turned around and headed back to camp. The fun weekend vibe was completely gone. We packed up in tense silence, all of us feeling the same thing. We needed to get out of there. As we shouldered our packs to hike back to the car, I spotted something hanging from a nearby tree branch that I'm certain wasn't there the night before. A small bundle of twigs tied together with what looked like hair. I didn't point it out to the others. The hike back to the car seemed longer than I remembered. The forest felt different, claustrophobic, with too many shadows despite the mid-morning sun. No one spoke much. We just wanted to get to the car and leave. When we finally reached the gravel road where we'd parked, my relief turned to cold fear. Travis's SUV had been ransacked. The windows were intact, but the doors were open and our extra supplies were scattered everywhere. The worst part was finding long, deep scratches running along both sides of the vehicle, like something with massive claws had methodically marked it. "Jesus Christ," Travis whispered, running his fingers along one of the gouges in the metal. "What could do this?" We quickly loaded up, not bothering to properly pack the scattered gear. Travis tried the engine, and thankfully, it started right away. As we pulled onto the narrow road leading out of the park, I glanced in the side mirror and saw movement in the tree line behind us. Just a flash of something pale moving between the trunks, too quick to make out clearly. We'd driven about 10 minutes when we spotted an old rusted pickup truck behind us. It kept a consistent distance, never getting too close but never falling back either. The driver was just a silhouette. "Is he following us?" Jennifer asked, turning in her seat to look. The truck stayed behind us for miles, all the way to a fork in the road. Travis took the right fork toward the highway, but instead of continuing straight, the truck also turned. "Floor it," I told Travis. He pressed the gas and the SUV lurched forward. The truck sped up too, getting closer. That's when I noticed something that still gives me nightmares. There was no one behind the wheel. The driver's seat appeared empty. The truck rammed us from behind, nearly sending us off the road. Travis fought to keep control as we fishtailed on the gravel. The truck backed off slightly, then rammed us again, harder. Jennifer was screaming. Sadie was trying to call 911, but we had no signal. The truck was gaining on us again, and I remembered the flare gun. I dug through my backpack until my fingers closed around it. "Travis, slow down just enough to let it get close," I shouted. "Are you crazy?" he yelled back, but he eased off the gas slightly. The truck closed the distance quickly. I rolled down my window, leaned out, and aimed the flare gun directly at the windshield of the truck. I pulled the trigger, and the flare shot out with a whoosh, leaving a bright red trail as it slammed directly into the empty windshield. What happened next defies explanation. The truck swerved violently, and a high-pitched, inhuman shriek erupted from inside it. Not the sound of brakes or metal. This was a living scream of pain. The truck veered off the road and crashed into a tree with a deafening impact. We didn't stop to investigate. Travis floored it all the way to the highway, and we didn't speak until we were 50 miles away, stopped at a gas station outside Birmingham. "What the hell was that?" Sadie finally asked, her voice shaking. None of us had an answer, but sitting there in that gas station parking lot, we made a pact to figure it out. Travis remembered his dad's story about the figure with antlers, the inhuman footprints, the hand on our tent, the driverless truck that screamed. It was all connected somehow. Over the next week, we researched local legends, starting with Travis's dad. He was reluctant to talk at first, but finally told us about an old Native American legend, the Wendigo, a spirit born from human cannibalism that possessed people and transformed them into monsters. Emaciated, with antlers, unnaturally tall, and always hungry. The more we researched, the more stories we found about strange disappearances in those woods going back decades. Hikers who vanished without a trace. Hunters who came back changed, only to disappear again months later. And whispers about certain families in the county who protected something in those woods. We became obsessed. We gathered supplies, hunting rifles borrowed from Travis's dad, cameras, extra batteries, and I brought my father's flare gun again. 2 weeks after our first trip, we went back, determined to get evidence of whatever was out there. This time we went during daylight, parking at a different trailhead and hiking to a ridge overlooking our previous campsite. We set up cameras at various angles and waited. As the sun set, the forest went silent again. That same unnatural quiet from before. We stayed hidden in our blind, watching through binoculars and night vision scopes. Hours passed with nothing but that heavy watching silence. Then Travis nudged me and pointed. At the edge of our old campsite stood a figure. Even from a distance I could tell it was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It was pale, almost gray in the moonlight, and impossibly thin, like skin stretched over a skeleton. And from its head extended what looked like deer antlers, but larger, more twisted. It moved with a jerking, unnatural gait, sniffing the air where our tents had been. I raised my camera and started filming, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. The creature suddenly stopped and turned its face directly toward our hiding spot. Even at that distance I could see its eyes, black voids in its gaunt face. It knew we were there. Travis raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the silent forest, and the creature jerked as the bullet hit it. But instead of falling, it let out the same inhuman shriek we'd heard from the truck. It charged toward our position with impossible speed, covering ground faster than anything human could move. We ran. Abandoning most of our gear, we fled through the dark forest toward where we'd parked. I tripped over a root and fell hard, the camera flying from my hands. As I scrambled to grab it, I caught a glimpse of the thing pursuing us. It was closer now, and I could see details I wish I could forget. The way its ribcage protruded through its gray skin, its arms too long for its body, ending in hands with fingers like the ones that had pressed against our tent. Its face was the worst, barely human, with a mouth full of jagged teeth and those empty black eyes. I grabbed the camera and ran. Somehow we made it back to the car. Travis started the engine before we even had the doors closed, and we sped away, the headlights briefly illuminating the creature as it emerged from the trees behind us. In that flash of light, I saw it clearly, a walking nightmare that shouldn't exist in our world. Back in Birmingham, we reviewed the footage. It wasn't great, shaky and dark, but it clearly showed something inhuman moving through the woods. We had evidence. We decided to take it to authorities outside the county. We didn't trust the local sheriff after what Travis's dad had told us about certain families protecting the woods. We contacted a reporter from a national news outlet who was intrigued enough to agree to meet us. The night before our meeting, I was backing up the video files when I heard a vehicle pull up outside my apartment. Looking out the window, I saw 3 black SUVs and men in tactical gear approaching my building. I barely had time to send the files to an encrypted email account before my door was kicked in. Men in black tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. As they dragged me out, I caught a glimpse of one of their forearms. He had rolled up his sleeve, revealing a tattoo of a Wendigo. I was taken to what looked like an interrogation room. Concrete walls, no windows, a metal table bolted to the floor. They left me alone for hours. Eventually, a man in a suit came in. He didn't identify himself or ask questions. He simply laid photos on the table. Pictures of Jennifer at her workplace, of Travis and Sadie at their homes, of my father sitting on his porch. Accidents happen in the woods all the time, he said calmly. Hikers get lost. Sometimes they're never found. He gathered the photos and left. They released me the next morning on the outskirts of town. My apartment had been cleaned out. No computer, no phones, no cameras. The footage was gone. When I finally made it to Jennifer's place, she was terrified. They'd visited her too. The reporter never showed for our meeting. When I called the news outlet, they had no record of the person we'd spoken to. It's been 4 years now. We've all tried to move on with our lives. Jennifer and I broke up. The strain was too much. Travis and Sadie moved to Colorado. My dad passed away last year, and going through his things, I found old journals where he documented similar experiences in those same woods when he was young. I don't know what we saw out there. I don't know who the men were that took me, but I know the reach of whatever protects that thing in the woods extends far beyond what we imagined. Sometimes I wake up at night and feel like someone's watching me through my window. Sometimes I hear a scratching at my door, and sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I check my rearview mirror, half expecting to see an empty, rusted truck following me. I still don't sleep well during storms. Been that way since I was 6. My therapist says writing about it might help, so here goes. It was 1988, and I lived in a tiny village in Finland called Kilmakoski. To call it remote is an understatement. We were basically a collection of wooden houses surrounded by endless forest. Our village was so small that our school had only 9 students total, ages 6 to 12, all in one classroom with 2 teachers. When Mrs. Korjanen and Mr. Javanon announced we were taking a field trip to Olavinleen Castle, you would have thought they'd told us we were going to Disneyland. None of us had ever been more than a few kilometers from home. I remember jumping up and down, then running home through the snow to tell my parents. "Aiti, Isa, we're going to see a real castle," I shouted as I burst through our front door, tracking snow all over the floor my mother had just cleaned. The morning of the trip, my mother dressed me in so many layers I could barely move my arms. It was early March, still freezing in Finland. I remember the sky that morning, gray and heavy, like a blanket that might drop at any moment. My father said it was snow sky, but something about it felt different. The school bus was actually just a van, but to us it was a magical chariot. I sat next to Elena, my best friend. We pressed our faces against the windows as we drove away from our village, watching the endless trees pass by. I'd never been in a vehicle for so long before. About 2 hours into the drive, we stopped at a roadside rest area. It was just a small building with bathrooms and a couple of vending machines. While we were all stretching our legs, I wandered near where Mrs. Korjanen and Mr. Javanon were talking quietly. They didn't notice me. "The forecast changed," Mr. Javanon was saying. "They're expecting that system to move in earlier." Mrs. Korjanen looked troubled. "Should we turn back? We're closer to Savonlinna now than to home. We'll be fine." Then Mrs. Korjanen said something that stuck with me. "I don't like being near Lake Sima during storms. Not after what happened in '83. Mr. Jarvanen cut her off when he spotted me. "Mika, go join the others." I scurried away, but those words planted a seed of unease in my stomach. Back on the road, the sky darkened rapidly. Not normal darkness, but a strange greenish-black color I'd never seen before. The wind picked up too, rocking our little van. Elena grabbed my hand when thunder boomed overhead. "Look, Mika!" someone shouted. Through the windows, we could see Lake Sima in the distance, its waters churning and black. And there, rising from a small island in the lake, was Olavinlinna Castle. Lightning flashed at that exact moment, illuminating the castle in a stark white glow. It didn't look like the picture Mrs. Korjanen had shown us in class. It looked wrong. The stone walls seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The towers looked like grasping fingers against the sky. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, rain was coming down in sheets. Mr. Jarvanon had to shout to be heard over the storm. "Stay together! Run straight to the entrance!" We made a dash for it, our little boots splashing through puddles, rain soaking through our coats despite parents' careful preparations. Inside, the castle foyer was dark. The power had gone out. A tall man with a flashlight approached. "Welcome to Olavinlinna Castle. I'm Antti, your guide today." He spoke Finnish with an accent I couldn't place. "We've lost electricity, but don't worry. The castle has stood for over 500 years. It has weathered worse storms than this." Mrs. Korjanen looked uncertain. "Perhaps we should reschedule?" "Nonsense," Auntie smiled. "I can give you a more authentic tour, how the castle was experienced before modern conveniences. The children will find it exciting, I'm sure." I remember his smile didn't reach his eyes. They remained dark, like the waters of Lake Sima. Our tour began normally enough. Auntie carried a lantern, not a flashlight, but an actual oil lantern, and led us through the main halls. He explained how the castle was built in 1475 to protect the Swedish-Finnish kingdom from Russian attacks. The lantern cast huge, shifting shadows on the stone walls, making the place feel alive and breathing. "The castle has 3 main towers," Auntie explained. "The bell tower, the church tower, and the keel tower, named after a knight who was said to have performed terrible experiments in its depths." A clap of thunder shook the walls just as he said this, making us all jump. I swear I saw him smile. The deeper we went into the castle, the colder it got. Not just cold, a penetrating chill that seemed to reach straight into your bones. Our breath fogged in front of our faces. The storm outside became a distant rumble, replaced by the sound of our footsteps echoing on stone. Anti led us down a narrow spiral staircase. "We're now entering the dungeons," he said. "Watch your step." The staircase seemed to go down much further than should have been possible. I counted 73 steps. I know because counting helped me manage my growing fear. The walls closed in, rough stone catching at our coats. The air became stale and damp. At the bottom, Auntie paused. The dungeons of Olavinlin held many prisoners over the centuries. Some say their spirits never left. That's when we heard it. A scream, unmistakably human, echoing through the stone corridors. Not like someone playing a prank or trying to scare us. This was raw, primal, the sound of genuine terror. Elena started crying. Some of the older kids tried to act brave, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Mrs. Korjonen grabbed Auntie's arm. "What was that?" Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white. "Probably the wind in the old chimney shafts," Auntie said, but he didn't sound convinced. The scream came again, closer this time. Mrs. Korjonen and Mr. Jarvanon exchanged glances. "Children, stay with Auntie," Mrs. Korjonen said firmly. "We'll go see what that noise is." "I don't think you should," Auntie started, but they were already heading down a dark corridor, flashlights in hand. Auntie tried to continue the tour, explaining something about medieval torture methods, but none of us were listening. The minutes stretched endlessly. My watch, a cheap digital thing with a cartoon character, showed that 15 minutes had passed when we heard heavy footsteps approaching. A man in a security uniform appeared, not our teachers. His face was pale, and he was speaking rapidly into a radio in Finnish, too fast for me to follow completely. "You need to leave, now." He addressed Auntie directly. "There's been an incident." "What kind of incident?" Auntie asked, his voice suddenly different, sharper, more alert. "Just get the children out. Follow the emergency route." As the security guard led us through narrow passages I hadn't seen before, I noticed something on the wall, a smear of what looked like fresh blood, glistening in the beam of his flashlight. He quickly directed us away, but I saw it. I know what blood looks like. We emerged into a different part of the castle, where more security guards were gathered. And there was Mr. Jarvanon, sitting on a bench, his face ashen. His right arm was bandaged, and the bandage was soaked through with red. A medic was attending to him. "Where's Mrs. Korjonen?" Elena asked, voicing what we were all wondering. Mr. Jarvanon looked up, his eyes unfocused. "It took her," he mumbled. "It came from the walls and took her." The security guard ushered us away quickly, telling us not to listen. As we were hurried toward the exit, I glanced down a darkened corridor and froze. There, in the shadows, stood a woman in an old-fashioned dress. Her skin was so pale it seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. She was looking directly at me, one finger raised to her lips in a shushing gesture, the other hand beckoning me to come to her. "Mika, keep moving." The security guard grabbed my shoulder, breaking my trance. When I looked back, the corridor was empty. Outside, the storm had stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The sky was clearing, streaks of blue appearing between clouds. It felt wrong, like the world should still be dark and stormy to match what was happening. They loaded us into the van, but we didn't leave right away. Police cars and ambulances arrived. Men in uniforms went into the castle. They brought Mr. Jarvanon out on a stretcher and put him in an ambulance. We never got to say goodbye. Another teacher from Savonlinna was brought to drive us home. The ride back was silent, except for occasional sniffling. I remember looking back at the castle as we drove away. It looked smaller, almost innocent in the late afternoon sun, but I knew what I had seen. The next days were a blur of police interviews and concerned parents. They asked me over and over what I had seen in the castle. I told them about the blood on the wall, about Mr. Jarvanon's words, about the woman in the corridor. The adults exchanged glances when I mentioned the woman. "There was no woman, Mika," they would say. "You were scared and imagined it." But I know what I saw. The story made national news. "Teacher disappears in medieval castle," the headlines read. They searched every inch of Olavinlinni. They even brought in ground-penetrating radar to check for hidden rooms or passages. Mrs. Korjunen was never found. Mr. Jarvanen never returned to our school. I heard later that he'd been transferred to a special hospital in Helsinki. My parents wouldn't tell me more, changing the subject whenever I asked. Our village tried to move on. We got a new teacher. People stopped talking about the incident in front of us children. But things were never the same. Our tiny community, once so close-knit, became fragmented by rumors and theories. Some families moved away. I had nightmares for years, always the same. I'm back in that dark corridor, and the pale woman is beckoning to me. In some dreams, I follow her. In those dreams, I see what happened to Mrs. Korjunen. I wake up screaming from those. 10 years passed. I was 16, preparing for university, trying to put my childhood behind me. Then the letter arrived. It came in a heavy parchment envelope with no return address, just my name written in elegant old-fashioned handwriting. Inside was a single sheet with 7 words. "The castle remembers. It's time for you to return." I should have thrown it away. I should have told my parents. Instead, I took money from my savings and bought a bus ticket to Savonlinna. The castle looked exactly the same when I arrived, though it was summer now rather than winter. Tourist groups moved through the sunlit courtyards, taking photos and listening to guides. Nothing like the dark, forbidding place in my memories. I bought a ticket for the regular tour, heart pounding as I walked through the same entrance we'd used 10 years before. Different guide, normal lighting, everything completely ordinary. Until I saw him, Antti, standing in a shadowy archway, watching me. He hadn't aged a day. He approached when the tour group moved on, leaving us alone in the corridor. "You came back," he said simply. "You sent the letter." He shook his head. "I didn't, but I've been expecting you. The castle called you back." "What happened to Mrs. Korjunen?" I demanded. Antti reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden amulet on a leather cord. "Take this. Keep it with you at all times while you're here." He pressed it into my palm. The wood was warm, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. "You want answers," he continued. "There's a door in the eastern dungeon wall that the regular tours don't visit. Find it tonight after closing. I'll leave it unlocked for you." "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "You shouldn't," he replied. "But you will come anyway. You need to see." He was right. After the castle closed to visitors, I hid in a bathroom until the staff had done their rounds. The amulet felt hot against my skin as I crept through the darkened corridors, finding my way to the eastern dungeon. The door was there, ancient wood reinforced with iron bands, slightly ajar. Beyond it, a narrow staircase descended into darkness deeper than seemed possible. I followed it down, the walls closing in around me. My flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness rather than cutting through it. At the bottom was a chamber that couldn't possibly exist, much too large and deep to fit within the castle's known foundations. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by columns carved with writhing figures. The air felt thick, resistant, like moving through water. In the center of the chamber stood what I first thought was a statue, a twisted, elongated figure with too many limbs bent at impossible angles. Then it moved, unfolding itself like a spider rising from its web. I recognized the face despite its distortion, the stretched jaw, the two wide eyes. It was Mrs. Corjonen. What happened next is hard to describe. The thing that had been my teacher spoke, but not with words. Images and sensations flooded my mind. Ancient entities sleeping beneath the castle, awakening during the storm, needing vessels, feeding on fear. I understood that Mrs. Corjonen had been transformed, not killed, made into a conduit for something older than human civilization. The amulet burned against my chest as the creature approached. It stopped just short of touching me, hissing at the wooden charm. "He has marked you as protected," it said in Mrs. Corjonen's voice, distorted like a broken record. "But you will return when you're ready. They all do." I ran. Somehow I found my way back up those stairs, through the castle, and out into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached the bus station, where I waited until morning for the first bus home. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? I threw away the amulet as soon as I crossed the Finnish border, but sometimes I wake up holding something wooden in my hand that wasn't there when I fell asleep. That was 15 years ago. I live in America now, as far from Olavinlinna as I could get. But sometimes I still dream of that castle. And lately, I've been finding scraps of parchment with familiar handwriting among my things. The last one said, "Others are coming. They need your guidance." I don't know what to do. I don't know if writing this was a mistake that will somehow make things worse. All I know is that somewhere in Finland, something ancient is awake and hungry. And somehow, I'm connected to it. Last night my phone rang at 3:17 a.m. When I answered, I heard only the sound of stone grinding against stone, and beneath it, a child crying. Then Mrs. Corjonen's voice whispered, "Mika, bring them to me. I've booked a flight back to Finland. I don't think I have a choice anymore." I never thought I'd actually write this all down. But it's been 24 years and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. Maybe getting it out will help. I don't care if anyone believes me. I know what happened that summer at Camp Whispering Pines, and it's something I'll never forget. It was the summer of 1999, right after my junior year of high school. I needed money for college, and being a camp counselor seemed like a perfect gig. Fresh air, swimming, and getting paid to basically hang out in the woods for 2 months. The job listing made it sound like paradise. Join our team at historic Camp Whispering Pines and create summer memories that will last a lifetime. Yeah, they got that last part right, just not in the way they advertised. I remember driving up with my parents. The camp was tucked away in this dense forest about 3 hours from home. The main road turned into gravel, which turned into basically 2 dirt tracks through increasingly thick woods. When we finally broke through the trees, there was this big wooden sign, "Welcome to Camp Whispering Pines, where adventure awaits." Below it, someone had carved something that looked like it had been partially sanded away. I couldn't make out what it said. My parents helped unload my stuff at the counselor's cabin, gave me awkward hugs, and took off. I remember watching their car disappear down that dirt road and feeling this weird knot in my stomach. Not homesickness exactly, more like, I don't know, like something was off. The counselor's cabin was this big, rustic building with bunk beds lined against the walls. When I walked in, there were already a few people there. This huge guy with a red beard was sitting on one of the top bunks, strumming a banjo and singing some camp song. He jumped down when he saw me. Seriously, the whole cabin shook, and practically crushed my hand when he shook it. "Charles, right? I'm Cliff, head counselor. Welcome to the Pines." His voice was so loud it practically rattled the windows. Cliff was probably in his mid-20s, and he had the energy of like 3 normal people combined. He introduced me to the others. Leo, this skinny guy with glasses who barely looked up from his guitar when I came in. Vanessa, who had this intense Boston accent and immediately told me the top 5 rules I needed to know. Rule 1, don't touch my stuff. Rule 2, don't touch my snacks. And then there was Katya. Katya was an exchange student from Russia, and man, I'm not going to lie, I immediately had a crush. She had these really intense eyes and this slight accent that made everything she said sound important. She was reading some thick paperback when I came in, but actually put it down and came over to say hi, which made me feel weirdly special. The camp director, Frank Holloway, showed up that evening. He was this older guy, probably in his 50s, with this permanent sunburn and a camp-whispering pines cap that looked like it had been through a war. He gave us this whole orientation speech about the camp's proud traditions and how we were going to shape young lives. But something about him seemed, I don't know, distracted, like he was always looking over our shoulders at something. The week before campers arrived was for training. We learned all the activities, emergency procedures, where everything was stored, normal camp stuff. But there was this weird tension I couldn't place. Cliff would sometimes stop mid-sentence during training and stare into the woods. Frank would check the locks on the storage shed 3 or 4 times before walking away. Little things that just felt off. It was during a campfire on the 3rd night that Cliff told us about Sam. We were roasting marshmallows, and Vanessa asked about some boarded-up cabin we'd seen near the archery range. "That was Sam's place," Cliff said, his voice dropping lower than I'd ever heard it. "The camp handyman used to live on site year-round." "What happened to him?" Leo asked, suddenly interested. Cliff looked at Frank, who was poking at the fire and pretending not to listen. "Sam worked here for like 20 years. Good guy. Kept to himself. Then, I don't know, something changed. Started talking to himself. Got paranoid. Said he could hear the trees whispering to him at night. I remember laughing nervously, but nobody else did. People just thought he was getting eccentric, you know. But then he started leaving weird carvings around camp. Symbols, words in Latin. Frank found him one night digging this massive hole behind his cabin. When Frank asked what he was doing, Sam said he was making room for what's coming. Frank stood up suddenly. "That's enough ghost stories for tonight. Early day tomorrow." As Frank walked away, Cliff leaned in and whispered, "Sam disappeared into the woods about 15 years ago. Just walked off one day. They found his cabin full of those carvings, pages of writings that didn't make sense. Some people think he's still out there." I remember Katya rolling her eyes. Classic American camp story to scare the new people. I wished I could be as dismissive as her, but that night I kept thinking about Sam and those carvings, and I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the woods outside our cabin. The campers arrived that weekend, about 80 kids between ages 8 and 14. I was put in charge of the Bobcats, 10 boys around 11 years old. They were good kids mostly, full of energy and stupid jokes. For a while, everything was normal. We did hikes, swimming, crafts, campfires, typical camp stuff. But then things started getting weird. It was little things at first. Tools would go missing from the shed, then turn up in strange places like inside the hollow of a tree or balanced on the camp flagpole. Food kept disappearing from the kitchen Not just snacks, but raw meat, whole loaves of bread. The camp cook, this older woman named Martha, was furious and kept accusing the counselors, but none of us were doing it. About a week in, I was walking back to the counselor's cabin after lights out. It was a really dark night, no moon, and the path was only lit by these dim solar lights that were spaced way too far apart. I heard something rustling in the bushes near the dining hall and stopped. I thought it might be a raccoon or something, but when I squinted through the darkness, I saw a human shape standing perfectly still beside the building. It was tall and thin, and it was just watching me. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice came out all shaky. The figure didn't move or respond. I fumbled for my flashlight, but by the time I got it switched on and pointed in that direction, whatever it was had disappeared. I ran the rest of the way to the cabin and told Cliff what I'd seen. He frowned and said it was probably just Frank doing a security check, but I could tell he didn't believe that. He told me not to mention it to the campers to avoid scaring them. The next morning, we found all the canoes had been dragged out of the boathouse and arranged in a perfect circle on the beach. Frank called an emergency staff meeting. "Look," he said, his face tight with stress, "we probably have some locals playing pranks on us. It happens every few years. Just keep your eyes open and make sure all buildings are locked at night." But I could tell he was scared too. That afternoon, I went to check on the equipment in the arts and crafts cabin. And that's when I saw it. Carved into the underside of one of the tables was the same kind of symbol Cliff had described Sam making. It looked like a tree with these weird branch patterns that made no sense botanically. And underneath it, in small, precise letters, "They're getting louder." I showed Katya later that day. She actually took a photo of it with her camera, which seems so quaint now in the age of smartphones. "Maybe this Sam guy wasn't crazy," she said, tracing the carving with her finger. "Maybe he heard something real." I asked her what she meant. She shrugged. "My grandmother in Siberia used to say some forests are special. They have their own consciousness, their own hunger." I laughed it off, but I stopped walking alone at night after that. Things escalated about 3 weeks into camp. Some of the campers started complaining about hearing whispers at night, whispers that came from outside their cabin windows. A few kids asked to call home, saying they were having nightmares about the tree man who watched them sleep. Vanessa found a collection of small animal bones arranged in a pattern outside her window one morning. Leo swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the forest during his morning run, someone who didn't move like a normal person, and Cliff became increasingly tense, constantly checking windows and locks. Then Timmy disappeared. Timmy was one of my bobcats, this really small 8-year-old who'd been placed with the older kids because his brother was in the group. I remember doing bed check that night, counting 10 heads, saying goodnight, and turning off the lights. But when I came to wake them up for breakfast, there were only 9 boys in the cabin. Timmy's sleeping bag was empty. The window above his bunk was open about 6 inches, even though I was sure I'd closed and locked all windows the night before. Jeremy, the kid in the bunk below Timmy's, was sitting up with these huge, terrified eyes. "I saw him," Jeremy whispered when I knelt down to ask if he'd seen Timmy get up. "Saw who, buddy? Timmy?" Jeremy shook his head. "The tall man. He was looking through our window last night. He had these long fingers, and he was tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap." Jeremy demonstrated with his own small fingers. "When I woke up again later, the window was open and Timmy was gone. We searched everywhere, the entire camp staff, then local police and search and rescue teams. They brought dogs that kept losing the scent at the edge of the forest, as if Timmy had just vanished." Frank called Timmy's parents, who were understandably hysterical when they arrived. Other parents started showing up to take their kids home early. That night, Cliff finally told us the truth. "This has happened before," he said, his voice hollow as we sat in the now half-empty counselor's cabin. "Two kids disappeared in the 80s, around the same time Sam went crazy. The camp closed for a few years after that." "What?" I was furious. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "Frank made us sign non-disclosure agreements." Cliff looked miserable. "I thought it was just a one-time tragedy, not whatever this is." "We need to get out of here," Leo said, already packing his stuff. "This is seriously messed up." "We can't just leave the remaining campers," Katya argued. "There's still 30 kids here. If something dangerous is out there, we need to protect them until their parents can come." We argued back and forth until we heard a sound that made us all freeze. A slow, deliberate knocking on the cabin door. Knock, knock, knock. I'll never forget the way we all looked at each other in that moment. Pure terror. None of us moved to answer it. The knocking came again, more insistent. Knock, knock, knock. Cliff finally stood up, grabbed a baseball bat from beside his bed, and moved toward the door. The rest of us backed away. I remember reaching for Katya's hand without thinking about it. Cliff opened the door, and there was nothing there, just darkness and the sound of the wind through the pines. "There's nobody," Cliff started to say. That's when something grabbed him from above the doorway. I only caught a glimpse, long, pale arms reaching down from where something was clinging to the top of the cabin. They wrapped around Cliff's shoulders and yanked him upward with such force that his feet left the ground. Cliff screamed, this horrible sound I can still hear sometimes, and then he was gone, dragged up into the darkness. Everything after that is fragmented in my memory. I remember Leo slamming the door shut. Vanessa was screaming. I was pulling Katya toward the window on the far side of the cabin. "We have to help Cliff," Katya kept saying, trying to pull away from me. I don't know where I found the courage, but I grabbed a flashlight and one of the fire pokers, and Katya and I climbed out the window. We could hear something moving on the roof, heavy thuds and scratching noises. We ran around to the front of the cabin, our flashlight beams bouncing wildly. There was no sign of Cliff, but we saw something moving toward the lake, a tall, misshapen figure dragging something heavy. "Cliff!" Katya screamed, and the figure stopped. Our flashlights illuminated it, and I felt my entire body go cold. It had been human once. It stood at least 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with arms too long for its body. Its skin was gray and bark-like in patches, as if it was turning into wood, and its face. God, its face was the worst part. Sunken eyes that reflected our flashlights like an animal's, and a mouth that had been stretched too wide, filled with teeth that looked filed to points. It was holding Cliff by his neck, and Cliff wasn't moving. The thing tilted its head at us, almost curious. Then it made this sound, not quite speech, but almost words, like it was trying to remember how to talk. "Help me," it rasped. "Sam, I'm Sam." I recognized the tattered remains of a Camp Whispering Pines maintenance uniform hanging from its emaciated frame. Whatever had happened to Sam, he wasn't really human anymore. Katya started backing away, pulling me with her, but I was frozen. Sam dropped Cliff to the ground and started moving toward us with this jerky, unnatural gait. "They're in the trees," he said, his voice like branches scraping against glass. "They're hungry." I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly we were sprinting back toward the main camp area, screaming for help. I could hear Sam behind us, moving fast, too fast for something so ungainly. We burst into the main lodge where the remaining campers had been consolidated. Frank was there with some of the parents who'd arrived to pick up their kids. "It's got Cliff," I gasped. "Sam! It's Sam!" There was instant chaos. Frank looked like he might pass out. Parents were grabbing their children. And then we heard it, that horrible scratching sound on the roof above us. "Everyone stay calm," Frank said, but his voice was shaking. "The police are on their way." The scratching moved across the ceiling, and then suddenly all the lights went out. Kids started screaming. I felt Katya grip my arm so hard it hurt. In the darkness, I heard the unmistakable sound of one of the windows breaking. What happened next is still a blur. There was screaming, furniture being overturned. Someone got the emergency lights working, and in the harsh, limited glow, I saw Sam moving through the room, impossibly fast, reaching for the smallest children. His movements were jerky, like a glitching video. Frank grabbed a shotgun from behind the front desk. I hadn't even known it was there, and fired a shot at Sam. It hit him in the shoulder, and Sam made this terrible shrieking sound, but it didn't stop him. He knocked Frank across the room like he weighed nothing. I saw Katya grab one of the camping axes from the wall and swing it at Sam when he got too close to a group of hiding children. The blade connected with his arm and his skin. It splintered, like wood. But there was blood too, black and thick, like sap. That's when we heard the sirens. Sam froze, his head tilting toward the sound, with one last look at us, a look that somehow seemed both predatory and pleading. He smashed through another window and disappeared into the night. The police arrived minutes later, finding a room full of traumatized people and no explanation that made sense. We told them what happened, but I could see in their faces they thought we were hysterical or making it up. They found Cliff by the lake, unconscious but alive. He had deep gouges in his shoulders where Sam's fingers had dug in, and he never fully regained full mobility in his right arm. They organized a more extensive search for Timmy and any sign of Sam, but I already knew it was hopeless. Whatever Sam had become, he knew those woods better than anyone. 3 days later, they found Timmy's body in a cave about 2 miles from camp. He wasn't alone. The cave contained human remains that forensics later identified as belonging to the 2 children who disappeared in the 80s, along with 3 hikers who'd gone missing in the area over the years. And carved into every surface of that cave were those same symbols we'd found around camp. Hundreds of them, along with writings that made no sense. The police photographer quit his job after documenting that scene. I heard later he checked himself into a psychiatric facility. Camp Whispering Pines closed permanently that summer. Frank Holloway was arrested for negligence and withholding information about the previous disappearances. The official report blamed Timmy's death and the attack on a mentally ill former employee living in the woods. But those of us who were there know it wasn't that simple. Sam wasn't just a man who lost his mind. Something in those woods had changed him. Something that whispered to him until he wasn't human anymore. It's been 24 years, and I've never gone camping again. I can't even stand the smell of pine trees. Leo, Katya, and I still keep in touch, the kind of bond you form when you've faced something impossible together. We met up 5 years ago and finally talked about it all properly. Katya thinks that whatever was in those woods is probably still there, waiting. Leo won't talk about it directly, but he wrote a song about it that he refuses to perform in public. As for me, I still wake up sometimes hearing that voice. You're hungry, and wonder if Sam was trying to warn us after all. about whatever lives in the whispers between the pines. Whatever turned him into something that wasn't quite human anymore. I don't have proof. I don't even have the photos Katya took. They mysteriously disappeared from her camera after it was returned by the police. All I have is what I saw, what I experienced, and the certainty that I'll never set foot in those woods again. I never thought I'd be sharing this. For 21 years, I've kept it to myself, partly because I don't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I'm still trying to make sense of it. But I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone out there has seen something similar. I was 23 when I landed my dream job as a park ranger at Whispering Pines National Park in northern Minnesota. Fresh out of college with my environmental science degree, I was beyond excited. The park is massive. 100,000 acres of pristine wilderness, dense pine forests, crystal clear lakes, and rugged terrain. I still remember my first day driving through the entrance gates in early September 2002, feeling like I had finally found my place in the world. There were only 5 full-time rangers for the entire park. Me, Harold, the head ranger who'd been there for 35 years, Lisa, Mike, and Deb. We were stretched thin, especially during fall when tourism picked up with people coming to see the changing leaves. My cabin was at the southeastern edge of the park, small, rustic, but it had everything I needed. I loved waking up to the sound of birds and the smell of pine. The first few weeks were perfect. I patrolled my assigned sectors, helped lost hikers, gave educational talks to school groups about conservation. I'd spend my evenings on my porch, drinking coffee and watching the sunset through the trees. I thought I'd found heaven. Then, as September turned to October, things started to change. It was subtle at first. While walking my usual patrol route, I'd suddenly noticed the forest had gone completely silent, like someone had hit a mute button. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. The first time it happened, I actually stopped in my tracks and checked my hearing. The silence would last maybe 30 seconds, then everything would resume as normal. I mentioned it to Harold once, and he just nodded, saying something vague about the woods have their moods. I started feeling watched, not just the normal awareness you develop in the wilderness, but a persistent, uncomfortable sensation of eyes tracking my movements. I'd spin around, expecting to catch someone behind me, but there was never anyone there, just trees and more trees. Then came the dreams, always the same. I'd be walking through the forest at night, following something I couldn't quite see. It moved just at the edge of my vision, leading me deeper into the woods until I'd find myself in a clearing with a pile of bones in the center. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding, but I wrote it all off. New job, new place, overactive imagination, until October 12th. I was doing a routine patrol in the northern section, an area rarely visited because the trails weren't as well maintained. It was about 4 p.m., and the sun was already starting to set behind the mountains. The light was doing that weird thing it does in fall, casting long shadows and making the forest look like a black and white photograph. I rounded a bend in the trail and stopped dead. Between 2 massive pine trees about 50 yards ahead stood something. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, but thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It was just standing there, motionless, partially hidden by shadow. My training kicked in and I called out, "Park Service, identify yourself." My voice echoed through the trees, but the figure didn't move. I reached for my radio, but when I looked back up, it was gone. Not like it had walked away, it was just gone. I honestly thought I was losing it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or a dead tree I'd mistaken for a person. I hurried back to the ranger station, feeling ridiculous but also deeply unsettled. Harold was there, going through some paperwork. He must have seen something in my face because he asked me what was wrong. I hesitated, then told him everything, the silence, the feeling of being watched, and what I'd seen that day. I expected him to laugh or suggest I needed more sleep. Instead, he got up, locked the door, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer. He poured 2 glasses and pushed one toward me. "You saw the Wendigo," he said simply, like he was telling me I'd spotted a common deer. I laughed nervously. "The what?" "The Wendigo. It's an Algonquian legend, a malevolent spirit that possesses humans, gives them an insatiable hunger for human flesh." He took a long sip of his whiskey. "This park has a history, James, a dark one. Back in the 70s, before I was head ranger, similar things happened. Sightings, strange noises, campers going missing." He told me that the land we now called Whispering Pines had been considered cursed by the local Native American tribes. They believed it was a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where spirits could cross over. "I've seen it twice in my time here," Harold admitted. "Once in '83 and again in '97, both times in October, both times right before bad things started happening." I wanted to dismiss it as local superstition, but the look in Harold's eyes stopped me. This wasn't a ghost story to him. It was a warning. "Keep your radio on at all times," he said. "Don't patrol alone if you can help it. And whatever you do, if you hear anything calling your name from the woods, ignore it." The next 2 weeks were a slow descent into nightmare. Campers started reporting equipment going missing or being vandalized. One family packed up and left after finding their tent slashed to ribbons overnight. A group of hikers reported seeing a very tall, emaciated man watching them from a distance. They thought it was just some weird local until they realized it had been standing in the same spot, completely motionless, for over an hour. Then we started finding animals. Dead deer, rabbits, and foxes arranged in bizarre patterns. Circles, pentagrams, strange symbols none of us recognized. The official explanation was that it was probably kids or cultists, but we increased our patrols anyway. My dreams got worse. Now I wasn't just following something, it was following me. I'd wake up with scratches on my arms that I couldn't explain. I started sleeping with the lights on, as stupid as that sounds for a grown man. October 30th. I was working late, updating trail maps in the main ranger station. Everyone else had gone home, but I wanted to finish my work. The station is mostly windows, designed to give a good view of the surrounding area. But at night, it just means you can't see out, while anything outside can see in. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, slow, deliberate steps that circled the building. I called out, thinking it might be Harold checking on me, but there was no answer, just those footsteps, circling, circling. I got up and looked out the window. Nothing at first, just darkness. Then something moved at the edge of the light thrown by the station's exterior lamps. Something tall and thin, with limbs that seemed to bend in places they shouldn't. It had eyes that caught the light like an animal's, glowing yellow-green in the darkness. And its mouth, God, its mouth was too wide, stretched in what might have been a smile, but looked more like a wound across its face. I stumbled back from the window, knocking over my chair. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then a scratching at the door. Light at first, then harder, more insistent. The handle turned, but I always locked up at night. Thank God I always locked up. I was frozen, unable to move or even reach for my phone. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped, and I heard a wailing sound coming from the direction of the campgrounds, like a person in terrible pain, but wrong somehow, higher pitched than a human should be able to make, and with a strange echo to it. Despite my fear and against all common sense, I felt compelled to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight, my radio, and the station's first aid kit and headed to my truck. The entire time, a voice in my head was screaming at me to go home, lock my doors, and wait for daylight. But something stronger pulled me toward that sound. I drove toward the campgrounds, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road winds through dense forest for about 2 miles before opening up to the main camping area. I was about halfway there when I saw movement between the trees, something keeping pace with my truck despite me going about 30 mph. I sped up, but it kept pace, darting between trees with impossible agility. Then it crossed the road ahead of me, a blur of pale, stretched limbs, and disappeared into the woods on the other side. I should have kept driving. I should have radioed for backup. I should have done anything except what I actually did, which was stop the truck and get out to look. The forest was dead silent. My flashlight beam seemed swallowed by the darkness. I took a few steps off the road, scanning the trees. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone there? Park service." Nothing, but I could feel it watching me. I saw a flash of movement deeper in the woods, and, like an idiot in a horror movie, I followed it. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wasn't thinking at all. I just kept walking deeper and deeper until I couldn't see the road anymore. Then I fell. The ground just seemed to disappear beneath my feet, and I tumbled down an embankment I hadn't even seen. My flashlight flew from my hand, and I landed hard, knocking the wind out of me. When I looked up, it was standing over me. The Wendigo, because what else could it be? 8 feet tall at least, with limbs too long and too thin to be human. Its skin was pale and seemed stretched too tight over its frame. Its face was mostly shadows, except for those glowing eyes and that terrible mouth, filled with teeth like needles. It leaned down toward me, and I smelled its breath, like rotting meat and something metallic, like old pennies. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice a rasping whisper that somehow seemed to come from all around me rather than from its mouth. I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die. When I opened them again, it was gone. I scrambled to my feet, found my flashlight miraculously still working, and ran. I ran like I've never run before or since, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the branches that whipped my face or the roots that threatened to trip me. I just ran until I broke through to the road, found my truck, and drove to the campgrounds. When I arrived, the place was empty, not just unoccupied, but empty in a way that felt wrong. There should have been about 20 groups camping that night. We were fully booked despite the cold weather, but there were no tents, no cars, no signs that anyone had been there at all. I radioed Harold, my voice shaking so badly I could barely speak. No response. I tried Lisa, Mike, Deb, nothing but static. I drove back to the ranger station, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The whole time I felt like something was following me, just out of sight in the darkness beyond my headlights. The station was dark when I arrived. I was sure I'd left lights on, but now it was completely black. I sat in my truck, engine running, staring at the building. No way was I going in there. I drove straight to Harold's house instead. It was nearly midnight when I pounded on his door. He answered in his bathrobe, looking confused and annoyed until he saw my face. I told him everything, the footsteps, the figure, the empty campground. He made some calls, and we drove back to the park together. When we arrived at the campgrounds, everything was normal. Tents, cars, sleeping campers, all exactly as it should have been. Harold looked at me like I was crazy, but he was kind enough not to say it. We checked the station. Everything normal there too. No signs of scratching on the door, no evidence anything had been disturbed. Harold suggested I take a few days off, said I was overworked, stressed. Maybe he was right. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw, what I felt, what I smelled. I quit the next day, packed up my stuff and drove south, as far from Whispering Pines as I could get. I work in an office now, in a city with lots of people and bright lights and no dark forests. But sometimes I still dream of it, the Wendigo. And in my dreams, it always says the same thing. You shouldn't be here. Then it smiles that terrible smile and adds, but I'll find you anyway. I don't know what happened at Whispering Pines that night. I've looked for records of missing persons, strange occurrences, anything that might explain what I experienced. Nothing. It's like it never happened. But I know it did. And I know that something ancient and evil lives in those woods. Don't go to Whispering Pines in October. Don't go alone. And if you hear something calling your name from the trees, just keep walking. Don't look back. Never look back. This happened back in October 1992. I was 44 at the time, working as an office manager in Phoenix. My life was all spreadsheets, conference calls, and fluorescent lighting. I desperately needed to disconnect and recharge, so I planned a week-long camping trip up in the Pinolino Mountains. I'd been there a few times before. Beautiful area, lots of pine trees, usually pretty quiet. My buddy Carl was supposed to come with me, but his wife had some complications with her pregnancy, so he had to back out at the last minute. I decided to go anyway. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. I packed up my old Winnebago, a beat-up '78 model that I'd bought second-hand and fixed up over the years. That thing was my pride and joy. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable and felt like a second home. I loaded up with enough supplies for the week: food, water, fishing gear, my camera, some books, and a couple bottles of whiskey. I remember feeling so excited as I pulled out of my driveway that morning, like I was finally escaping all the stress and bullshit of everyday life. The drive up was beautiful. The desert gradually giving way to scrubland, then the pine forests as I climbed into the mountains. I took my time, stopping at this little diner I knew along the way for lunch. The waitress there remembered me from previous trips and asked about Carl. When I told her he couldn't make it, she got this weird look on her face and said something like, "Be careful up there alone." I laughed it off, thinking she was just being dramatic. I reached the mountains by mid-afternoon and followed this old Forest Service road that Carl and I had discovered on a previous trip. It wasn't on any of the tourist maps, which is why we liked it. After about 45 minutes of slow driving on the rough dirt road, I found this perfect clearing surrounded by tall pines. It was large enough for the Winnebago with room to set up a fire pit, and there was a small stream about 100 yards away. I could hear it bubbling as I set up camp. Perfect spot, I thought. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. I hiked during the mornings, fished in the afternoons, and spent my evenings relaxing by the campfire with a book and some whiskey. The weather was ideal, cool and crisp, with that perfect fall mountain air that smells like pine and earth. The stars at night were incredible, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. I remember thinking how Carl was missing out, but also enjoying the solitude. I'd always been comfortable on my own. Everything changed on the third night. I was sitting by my fire, about halfway through my dog-eared copy of The Old Man and the Sea, when I heard rustling in the bushes behind my campsite. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably a raccoon or maybe a deer. The mountains were full of wildlife. But then it happened again, louder this time, like something big was moving through the underbrush. I called out, thinking maybe another camper had wandered into the area, but there was no response, just more rustling, then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it in the direction of the sound, but all I could see were trees and shadows. The firelight only extended so far, creating this barrier between my little circle of light and the vast darkness beyond. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond that boundary, waiting. I tried to return to my book, but I couldn't focus. Every few minutes I'd hear another sound, a twig snap, leaves crunching, branches moving when there was no wind. Each time I'd look up, shine my light around, see nothing. Eventually I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was alone in the woods, and the mind tends to fill the silence with threats that aren't there. I decided to turn in earlier than usual. Inside the Winnebago, with the door locked and the small propane heater keeping the chill away, I felt safer. I drifted off to sleep with the faint sounds of the forest in the background. Morning came, and with the sunlight streaming through the windows, my fears from the night before seemed ridiculous. I made coffee on my little stove and stepped outside to enjoy the crisp morning air. That's when I saw them, footprints circling my campsite. They weren't human tracks. They were too large, too oddly shaped. Each print was maybe 15 inches long, with what looked like elongated finger-like toes splayed out at the front. They didn't match any animal tracks I'd ever seen before, and I'd done enough hiking to be familiar with the local wildlife. These were something else entirely. I followed the tracks around my campsite. Whatever had made them had completely circled my Winnebago, stopping at each window, as if it had been looking in while I slept. The thought made my skin crawl. The tracks led back into the forest in the direction of the stream. Common sense told me to pack up and leave. Something wasn't right here. But curiosity is a powerful force, and I'd always been too curious for my own good. I decided to stay another day to try and figure out what had made those tracks. I told myself I'd set up some kind of trap, not to harm whatever it was, but to get evidence. Maybe it was some undiscovered species or a known animal behaving strangely. I tried to rationalize it, to make it make sense. That day I kept busy around camp, collecting firewood, checking my fishing gear, anything to keep my mind occupied. But I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks and what might have made them. I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see something staring back at me. As dusk fell, I built a larger fire than usual, hoping the extra light would keep whatever it was at bay. I had my camera ready and my hunting knife close at hand, though I'm not sure what good I thought either would do. The night was quieter than before, almost unnaturally so. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting. Just the crackling of my fire and the occasional distant call of some night bird. Around 10 p.m. I saw them, eyes reflecting my firelight from the edge of the forest. They were amber, almost golden, and set unnaturally high off the ground, at least 7 feet up. They didn't blink, just stared, unmoving. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to grab my camera, to have proof, but I was paralyzed with fear. The eyes watched me for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then they were gone, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. I sat by the fire until dawn, too terrified to sleep, my knife clutched in my hand. When morning came, I was exhausted, but immediately went to check for tracks. They were there again, more of them this time, and closer to my campfire than before. Whatever had been watching me had come within 15 feet of where I'd been sitting. The thought made me feel sick. I should have left then. Anyone with any sense would have packed up and hightailed it out of there. But I was still telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was a bear walking on its hind legs. Maybe it was some local playing a prank on the city guy camping alone. I decided to follow the tracks this time to see where they led. I grabbed my camera, my knife, and a water bottle and set off into the forest. The tracks were easy to follow at first, clear impressions in the soft earth. They led down toward the stream and then followed it upstream for about half a mile. The further I went, the more uneasy I felt. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees blocking out more and more of the sunlight. The air felt heavier, colder. I started to notice other strange things. Claw marks on trees, too high up to be from a bear. Tufts of coarse, dark hair caught on branches. And the smell, a rank, musty odor that seemed to hang in the air. Then I found it, a small clearing with what looked like the remains of kills, animal bones scattered around, some fresh, some old and bleached by the sun. In the center was what appeared to be a crude shelter made of broken branches and pine boughs. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the work of any animal I knew of. This was deliberate construction. I took a few hasty photos and then turned to leave. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl but not quite, coming from somewhere behind me. I didn't look back. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the branches that whipped at my face or the roots that tried to trip me. I made it back to my campsite, my lungs burning and my heart feeling like it would explode. Nothing had followed me, as far as I could tell, but I couldn't stay there. I decided I'd pack up and leave at first light the next morning. One more night, I told myself, just one more night, and then I'd be gone. I spent the rest of the day inside the Winnebago, doors locked, occasionally peering out the windows. As night fell, I reluctantly went outside to secure a few items I'd left out. The forest was silent again, watching, waiting. I hurried back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself I'd be safe until morning. I must have fallen asleep eventually, exhausted from the day's events. I woke to the sound of scratching. Something was outside, running its claws along the side of the Winnebago. Tap, 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 like it was testing the walls, looking for a way in. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, as the sounds moved around the vehicle. Then they stopped at the door. There was a moment of silence, and then the handle began to turn. I'd locked it. I was sure I had, but somehow it was turning. I watched in horror as the door began to open slowly, inch by inch. Through the crack, I could see nothing but darkness, and then a long clawed hand gripping the edge of the door. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember starting the engine. But suddenly I was behind the wheel, the Winnebago roaring to life. I floored it, not caring about the gear or what might be in my path. The door slammed shut from the sudden movement, and I heard a screech, part animal, part something else, as whatever had been trying to get in was thrown clear. I drove like a madman down that Forest Service road, branches scraping the sides of the Winnebago, rocks threatening to tear out the undercarriage. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, but I couldn't stop. I felt like if I stopped, even for a second, whatever that thing was would catch up to me. When I finally reached the main road, I kept driving until I hit the nearest town with a motel. I checked in, locked myself in the room, and sat on the bed shaking until dawn. I never went back to get the things I left behind, my fishing gear, some books, a cooler full of food. I couldn't bear the thought of returning to that place. In the light of day, in the safety of civilization, I tried to convince myself that I'd overreacted, that there was a logical explanation for everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew better. Over the years, I've researched what I might have encountered. I've looked into local legends, cryptid sightings, everything I could find. Some people talk about something they call the high tail, a creature that stalks the remote areas of the Pinolino Mountains. Others dismiss it as campfire stories meant to scare tourists. I've made a few return trips to the mountains over the decades, always with others, never alone, trying to find that clearing again. But I never could. It's like that specific spot has vanished, or maybe I just can't bring myself to recognize it. To this day, I don't know what was watching me from the forest that October. I don't know what tried to break into my Winnebago that night. But I do know that something's out there in those mountains, something ancient and mysterious that doesn't want to be found, something that watches and waits for unwary travelers to stumble into its territory. I'm 75 now, and I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, thinking I hear that tapping on my bedroom wall, remembering those amber eyes watching me from the darkness. Some things once seen can never be unseen. Some experiences change you forever. This was one of them. I've been trying to get these words out for days now, but my hands still shake when I try to type. I figured writing it down might help me process what happened, so here goes. I'm a writer. Not famous or anything. Just a mid-list author with 3 books published and struggling with a 4th. My agent kept pressing me about deadlines, and I just couldn't focus at home with all the distractions. So last month, I did what seemed smart at the time. I rented a cabin in Pinecrest Valley for 2 weeks to finish my manuscript. It was exactly what you'd expect, rustic, charming, isolated. The rental listing said, secluded mountain retreat, and they weren't kidding. My Subaru barely handled the dirt road leading up to it. The cabin sat about half a mile off the main Forest Service road, surrounded by tall pines and not much else. No visible neighbors, spotty cell service, just me and nature and my laptop. The first few days were actually productive. I'd wake up, make coffee, and write from sunrise to sunset. The quiet was exactly what I needed. There's something about being alone with your thoughts in the mountains that lets your mind wander in all the right ways. But then things changed. It was my 5th night there. I remember because I'd just hit 50,000 words on my manuscript and treated myself to an extra glass of wine with dinner. I was still riding that creative high around 11 p.m., typing away at the small wooden desk by the window when I first heard it. Whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the pine branches. I'd gotten used to the normal cabin sounds, the creaking wood, the occasional animal outside, the old refrigerator humming. But this was different. It sounded like hushed voices just on the edge of my hearing. I stopped typing and listened. Nothing for a minute, then there it was again. Definite whispering, and it was coming from outside. I got up and peered through the window, trying not to make any sudden movements that would give away my position. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in this eerie blue-white glow. At first I didn't see anything, just the trees, my car, the woodpile. Then movement caught my eye. 2 men emerging from the tree line about 50 yards from the cabin. They were dressed in dark clothes, moving slowly, deliberately, and they were carrying guns, not hunting rifles. These looked like handguns. One of them gestured toward the cabin, and I could see moonlight reflect off something in his hand. That's when my blood turned to ice. They were coming toward the cabin, toward me. I immediately turned off my lamp, plunging the room into darkness. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they might hear it from outside. I grabbed my phone. No signal, of course. The landline was on the kitchen wall, across an open space that was visible from the windows. The whispers got louder as they approached. I heard footsteps on the wooden porch steps. They weren't even trying to be completely silent anymore. That's what scared me most. They weren't worried about me hearing them. I slid down to the floor and crawled behind the sofa in the living room, trying to control my breathing. I'm not small, 5'8", and not exactly built for hiding in tight spaces. But terror makes you surprisingly flexible. I squeezed myself into the gap between the sofa and the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. The doorknob rattled, then silence for maybe 30 seconds. Crack! The sound of splintering wood as they kicked in the door. I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Heavy footsteps moved around the cabin. I heard them rifling through things, opening drawers, checking rooms. "Check upstairs," one of them said. His voice was casual, almost bored. "Someone's definitely here," the other replied. "Car outside, laptop still on." My laptop. I'd left it open on the desk, screen glowing. Stupid mistake. I heard them moving around more, methodically searching. The stairs creaked as one of them went up to the loft bedroom. The other one stayed on the main floor, getting closer to where I was hiding. I tried to make myself even smaller, pressing against the wall. My legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. Every breath felt too loud. "Nobody upstairs," the first man called down. "They're here somewhere," the second one said. He was in the living room now, just feet from me. People don't leave their computers running and just disappear. I held my breath as his footsteps circled the sofa. Then they stopped, right beside me. "Well, what do we have here?" The sofa suddenly moved away from the wall, exposing me like a terrified animal in a trap. I looked up to see a man in his 30s with a patchy beard, wearing a dark flannel shirt. He was pointing a gun directly at me. "Found her," he called out, smiling. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile a cat gives a cornered mouse. The other man appeared in the doorway, older, heavier, with a shaved head. "Well, ain't that convenient?" I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone completely dry. "Stand up," Beard said, gesturing with the gun. My legs were so numb I could barely feel them, but somehow I managed to stand. I was shaking uncontrollably. "Please," I finally managed to say. "Take whatever you want. My wallet's in my purse. There's some cash, credit cards." The two men exchanged glances, and then, this is the part that still haunts me, they both laughed. Not loud, just a low chuckle that made my skin crawl. "Hear that, Earl? She thinks we're here to rob her," Beard said. Earl, the older one, shook his head. "City people always think everything's about money." Something in their tone told me I was in much worse danger than a simple robbery. They were enjoying my fear, feeding off it. "What do you want?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. Beard stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cigarettes and something chemical on his breath. "We just want some entertainment. Gets boring up in these mountains." In that moment, I knew I was going to die if I stayed there. Some primal part of my brain took over, bypassing all rational thought. I didn't plan what happened next. My body just moved. I lunged to the side, shoving the coffee table into Beard's legs. He stumbled backward, cursing. I darted past him toward the door, adrenaline giving me speed I didn't know I had. Earl tried to grab me as I passed, but only caught the sleeve of my sweater. I heard fabric tear as I yanked away from him and bolted through the broken door. The night air hit me like a slap as I sprinted off the porch and into the yard. Behind me, I heard shouting and then the worst sound, footsteps pounding after me. I didn't take the driveway. Instead, I ran straight into the woods, hoping the trees would make it harder for them to see me. The moon provided just enough light to avoid running face first into a trunk, but not enough to clearly see the ground. I tripped over roots and rocks, scraping my hands and knees, but kept pushing forward. "She went this way," I heard one of them shout, too close behind me. I've never been athletic. I don't run marathons or go to the gym regularly. But that night, I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but pure fear kept me moving. The forest floor was uneven, covered in pine needles that made it slippery. I fell hard at one point, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a terrifying second, I couldn't breathe. I lay there gasping, hearing them getting closer. "We're gonna find you!" one called out, his voice echoing between the trees. "Might as well make it easy on yourself." I forced myself up and kept running, no longer caring about the noise I was making. My only thought was to put distance between us. I remembered from my drive up that the main road was downhill from the cabin, so I tried to keep moving downward, hoping to eventually hit pavement. The woods seemed endless. Every direction looked the same, just trees and moonlight and shadows that might be men with guns. I had no idea if I was even going the right way anymore. Then I heard a gunshot. The crack echoed through the trees, and I nearly screamed. Were they shooting at me, or just trying to scare me? "Next one won't be a warning," Beard's voice called out. I changed direction, zigzagging between trees, making myself a harder target. My foot caught on something, a fallen branch maybe, and I went down again, rolling down a steep embankment. Pain shot through my ankle, but I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I lay at the bottom of the slope, listening. Their voices were more distant now. Had I gained some ground, or were they just being quieter? I got up, wincing at the pain in my ankle. Not broken, I didn't think, but definitely sprained. I limped forward, trying to put as little weight on it as possible. That's when I saw it, a faint glow through the trees ahead. A streetlight, the road. Hope gave me a second wind. I hobbled toward it as fast as I could, ignoring the pain shooting up my leg with each step. Behind me, I heard them crashing through the underbrush. Still following, but farther back now. The trees thinned out, and suddenly I was at the edge of the forest. The paved road stretched before me, a single streetlight illuminating a small section. No cars, no houses visible, but it was civilization, a way out. I staggered onto the asphalt, looking both ways frantically. Which direction led to town? I couldn't remember. I chose left and started limping down the road as fast as I could. After about 50 yards, I risked a glance back. The edge of the forest where I'd emerged was empty. No sign of the men. Had they given up? Or were they just waiting, watching? I kept moving, afraid to stop. My ankle throbbed with every step, and I was covered in scratches and dirt. I must have gone another quarter-mile when headlights appeared in the distance. I immediately moved to the center of the road and started waving my arms frantically. The car slowed as it approached, an older couple in a sedan, looking concerned and confused. "Please help me," I gasped as they rolled down their window. "Some men at my cabin. They had guns." They let me in and drove me straight to the police station in the nearest town, about 15 miles away. I gave a statement, but I was so hysterical they could barely understand me. The officers were kind but looked skeptical, especially when I couldn't tell them exactly where the cabin was. or provide descriptions of the men beyond beard and bald. They sent deputies to check it out, but by the time they got there, the men were long gone. My laptop was still there, untouched. Nothing was stolen. The only evidence of what happened was the broken door and my belongings scattered around. The police suggested they might have been hunters trespassing who panicked when they realized someone was in the cabin, or maybe drug dealers who use remote areas for their operations. But I know what I saw in their eyes. It wasn't panic or surprise. It was excitement. They were hunting all right, but not for animals. I checked into a motel that night and drove home the next day, leaving most of my things behind. I couldn't bear to go back to the cabin to pack. The rental company wasn't happy, but I didn't care. It's been 2 weeks now. I've barely slept. Every noise makes me jump. I keep checking the locks on my doors and windows. I bought a security system and a dog, a big German shepherd from the rescue shelter. The worst part is, I still don't know who they were or why they chose my cabin. Was it random, or had they been watching me for days? The thought makes my skin crawl. I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't run, or if I had run but hadn't made it to the road. Sometimes I dream that I'm still running through those woods with those men right behind me, and I wake up gasping for air. I haven't written a word since it happened. My deadline passed, and my agent is getting impatient, but I can't focus on fiction when reality has become so terrifying. I saw something in those mountains, not just 2 men with guns, but something darker. The look in their eyes when they found me hiding, like they were savoring my fear, like this was a game they'd played before. I don't know if I'll ever go back to a remote place again. Cities have crime too, but at least there are people around who might hear you scream. The police called yesterday. They've found no leads, no suspects. The case will remain open, but without more evidence, there's not much they can do. So I'm left with this lingering dread, jumping at shadows, sleeping with the lights on. I keep thinking I hear whispers outside my window at night, but it's probably just my imagination working overtime. At least I hope it is, because sometimes, when I look out at the street, I swear I see a car I don't recognize, parked just far enough away to not be suspicious. And sometimes I think I see someone watching my apartment. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that they couldn't have followed me here, that they don't even know my real name. But then I remember, my laptop was still there, with all my information on it, my full name, my address, and I wonder if I ever really got away at all. I still can't sleep through the night. It's been 3 months since our vacation, and I jolt awake at the slightest noise. My husband thinks therapy might help, but how do I explain what happened to someone who wasn't there? They'll think I'm paranoid or making it all up. I need to get this out somewhere, though. Maybe writing it down will help. It was supposed to be a perfect family getaway. My husband Mark had been working insane hours at his accounting firm. Our teenage kids, Emily, 16, and Jason, 14, were constantly glued to their phones, and I needed a break from my job as a nurse. When Mark's co-worker offered us his cabin in Evergreen Woods for a steal, it seemed like the universe was giving us exactly what we needed. The drive up was actually nice. The kids eventually put their phones away as we lost reception, and we played those stupid car games families do on road trips. The snow started falling lightly as we wound through the mountain roads. It was the picture-perfect scene you'd see on a Christmas card. The cabin was everything the photos promised. Rustic, but with modern amenities, 3 bedrooms, a huge stone fireplace, and windows that looked out over nothing but pine trees and mountains. Mark started a fire while I unpacked groceries and the kids explored. We were about 20 miles from the nearest town, which seemed perfect, remote enough to disconnect, but close enough if we needed anything. That first night, we ate homemade chili, played Monopoly. Emily crushed us all, and actually talked like a family again. When we went to bed, I remember feeling thankful for the gentle snowfall outside. The weather forecast had mentioned a storm system moving in, but nothing dangerous, just enough snow to make everything prettier. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the wind. It was howling so loudly it sounded like someone screaming. When I looked out the window, I couldn't see anything but white. Mark woke up too, and we both went to check the weather report on his phone, but there was no service. The satellite internet and TV were down too. Mark tried to reassure me it was just a temporary outage from the storm. By morning, we couldn't open the front door. The snow had piled up almost to the top of it. The back door was slightly better. We could shove it open about a foot before hitting a wall of snow. All the windows showed the same thing, white, everywhere. We were snowed in, completely. "The plows will come through," Mark said confidently. "We've got plenty of food, firewood, and the generator if the power goes out. It'll be like an adventure." The kids were actually excited. A snow day in a cabin with hot chocolate and board games? It still felt like a vacation. That first full day was fine. The power flickered but stayed on. We played games, made a huge pot of soup, read books. It felt cozy, not scary. That night, though, something changed. I was the first to wake up. It was maybe 1 a.m., and there was a smell in the cabin that didn't belong. Cigarette smoke. Neither Mark nor I smoke, and our kids don't either. I nudged Mark awake. "Do you smell that?" I whispered. He sat up, confused at first, then nodded. "Stay here," he said, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. I didn't listen, of course. I followed him as he checked every room, every closet, under every bed. The kids were still asleep. All doors were locked from the inside, windows closed, but the smell was unmistakable. Someone had been smoking in our cabin. "Maybe it's coming through the vents somehow," Mark suggested, but the uncertainty in his voice gave him away. We both knew that made no sense. The next morning, I didn't mention the smoke to the kids. No need to scare them. But while making breakfast, I noticed something else wrong. The kitchen knife block was missing a knife, the big one I'd used to cut vegetables for the soup. I searched everywhere, thinking maybe I'd left it in the sink or dishwasher. "Mark," I called quietly when the kids were in the living room. "Did you move the big kitchen knife?" He hadn't. We looked everywhere. It was just gone. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind made these ungodly noises, moaning and howling. Sometimes it sounded like words, but that was just my imagination working overtime. Had to be. That afternoon, Emily came into the kitchen looking confused. "Mom, did you go through my bag? My stuff's all moved around." I hadn't. No one had. But when I checked, she was right. Her clothes were rearranged, and her hairbrush was on top of her clothes rather than in her toiletry bag where she always kept it. I was about to say something to Mark when Jason shouted from the living room, "Dad, come look!" We all rushed in. Jason was pointing at the window. There were footprints out there, human footprints, I swear. Mark and I pressed our faces to the glass, but all we could see was snow coming down so thick it was like a white wall. "You probably saw branches falling and making shapes in the snow," Mark said, but his voice had that fake calmness parents use when they're trying not to scare their kids. That night, we all slept in the living room near the fireplace. Mark said it was to conserve heat. but I knew the real reason. None of us wanted to be alone in our rooms. He took the fireplace poker and kept it beside his makeshift bed on the couch. I woke up to whispering. At first I thought it was Mark talking to one of the kids, but when I opened my eyes, everyone was asleep. The whispering was coming from outside. It sounded like it was right up against the window, but when I looked, there was nothing but darkness and snow. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching my family sleep, jumping at every creak of the cabin settling. Day 3 of being snowed in, and things started escalating. We found the missing kitchen knife, stuck into a tree outside the back door, visible only because the snow had melted slightly around it from the heat of the house. None of us had put it there. None of us had even been outside. Mark tried to downplay it. Maybe it fell into the trash, and when I took it out yesterday, it somehow got stuck in the tree. We all knew that made no sense, but what was the alternative? That someone else was out there, in a blizzard, playing sick games with us? That same day, we found cigarette butts on the back porch. They were partially covered by snow, but fresh enough that they couldn't have been from before we arrived, and written in the condensation on the bathroom mirror when no one had showered. Nice family. I wanted to leave, to just plow through the snow somehow and get to our car. But Mark checked. The car was buried under at least 4 feet of snow, and the battery was dead from the cold. Someone's messing with us, Emily said that night, her voice shaking. She was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. There's someone out there. It's just the storm playing tricks, Mark insisted, but he was sleeping with both the fireplace poker and a hammer next to him now. That 4th night was when we saw them. The power had finally gone out around dinner time. We were eating cold sandwiches by candlelight when the generator kicked in, giving us enough electricity for basic lights and heat. Jason was the one who spotted them first. "Dad," he said, his voice so quiet I barely heard him. "There's someone in the trees." We all turned to look out the window. In the dim light, reflected off the snow, about 50 yards from the cabin, 2 figures stood at the edge of the forest, just standing there, watching. Even from that distance I could see the gleam of their eyes reflecting the light. Mark immediately turned off all the lights. "Get down," he ordered, and we crawled away from the windows. "Who are they? What do they want?" Emily was crying now. "It's going to be okay," I said automatically, but the words felt hollow. We huddled in the hallway, away from windows. Mark had the poker, I had the hammer, and we'd given kitchen knives to both kids with strict instructions to only use them if absolutely necessary. An hour passed in terrified silence. Then came the first bang on the door, so loud it seemed to shake the whole cabin. Then another, and another. "We know you're in there," called a man's voice, followed by laughter. "Just want to say hello to our new neighbors." More banging, this time on the windows. 2 distinct voices now, calling to us, telling us to open up. "What's the matter? Don't you want to play with us?" The voice was slurring words. They were drunk or high or both. Mark's hands were shaking, but his jaw was set. "We need to show them we're not easy targets," he whispered. "I'm going to turn the lights back on and talk to them through the door. Let them know we're armed and they need to leave." Before I could stop him, he was moving toward the breaker box. The lights came back on, and Mark approached the front door, poker in hand. "We're armed in here," he shouted through the door. "The police know we're here, and they'll be checking on us if they don't hear from us soon." Laughter from outside. "No, they won't. No one's coming in this weather, city boy. No one knows you're here but us." "What do you want?" Mark's voice didn't shake, and I felt a surge of pride through my terror. "We were just being neighborly. Thought we'd introduce ourselves, maybe borrow a cup of sugar." More laughter, Then a crash as something hit one of the side windows, cracking it. The next few hours were a nightmare of psychological torture. They circled the cabin, banging on different windows and doors, calling out to us by name. Somehow they knew all our names. They described what we were wearing, what we'd been doing earlier in the day. They'd been watching us the whole time. "Emily's pretty," one of them called, and my daughter sobbed into my shoulder. "Bet she's even prettier up close." Mark tried reasoning, threatening, pleading. Nothing worked. They just laughed and kept up their circling game. Sometimes they'd go quiet for 20 minutes, making us think they'd left, only to suddenly bang on a window, right where one of us was standing. Around 3 a.m., they got bolder. We heard scraping at the back door. They were trying to pick the lock. Mark positioned himself there with the poker raised, while I stood guard at the front door. The kids were huddled in the hall bathroom, the only room without windows, armed with their knives. The lock jiggled, and then the door burst open. The man who stumbled in wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some mountain-dwelling monster, just an ordinary-looking guy in his 30s with a patchy beard and wild eyes. He held a hunting knife and reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. Mark didn't hesitate. He swung the poker, catching the man in the shoulder. The intruder howled but didn't go down. He slashed with his knife, catching Mark's arm, drawing blood. I screamed and ran forward with the hammer, hitting the man's hand. The knife clattered to the floor. Mark tackled him, and they crashed into the kitchen table. The second man appeared at the door, taller and thinner than the first, with a shotgun. My blood turned to ice. We were dead. But before he could raise it, Emily darted out from the hallway and stabbed him in the thigh with her kitchen knife. It wasn't deep, but the surprise was enough to make him stumble. Jason followed with his knife, slashing at the man's hand. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling, the noise deafening in the small cabin. What followed was chaos. All of us fighting, scratching, hitting, doing whatever we could to survive. Mark managed to knock the first man unconscious with the poker. I got the shotgun away from the second man and pointed it at him, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Get out!" I screamed. "Get out now!" He looked at his unconscious friend, then at the gun, calculating his odds. With a curse, he backed away, dragging his injured leg. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he kept backing out the door. We tied up the unconscious man with extension cords and barricaded ourselves in the hallway bathroom, the shotgun pointed at the door. None of us slept. Morning came, and with it the sound of engines. Through the window, we saw snowplows clearing the road, followed by police cars. Apparently, when the storm hit with unexpected intensity, the rental company had called the authorities to check on all their properties with guests. Our phones suddenly buzzed with reception. The cell towers were working again. The police arrested the man we'd tied up, a local named Derek Henderson with a record of burglary and assault. They found his buddy, Thomas Reed, a mile down the road, passed out in their truck from blood loss and alcohol. They told us the men were known troublemakers who targeted isolated vacation rentals during storms, usually just stealing things while people were out, but occasionally having fun with the guests if they were home. They'd been doing it for years. We spent the night at the police station giving statements. Mark needed stitches. Emily hadn't spoken a word since the attack. Jason kept checking windows and doors compulsively. I couldn't stop shaking. The cops said we were lucky. The storm had trapped those men too. They couldn't leave any more than we could. Usually they'd break in, terrorize a family, steal their stuff, and disappear back to town. With the roads blocked, they'd been stuck playing their sick game with us for days. They found journals in their truck, detailing what they'd done to other families. The cigarette smoke, the moving items, the watching. It was all part of their routine, their way of psychologically torturing people before they attacked. We drove home the next day in silence. Our perfect family vacation had turned us into strangers again, but in a different way. Now we were bound by trauma instead of disconnection. It's been 3 months. Emily's talking again, but not about what happened. Jason sleeps with a baseball bat beside his bed. Mark installed a security system that would make a prison look vulnerable. And me? I just keep reliving that night, wondering what would have happened if the storm had lasted one more day. The police say those men will be in prison for a long time. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still smell phantom cigarette smoke sometimes. And I still can't look at snow without seeing those 2 figures at the edge of the forest, watching us, waiting for their chance to come inside. It was supposed to be our annual hunting trip. Me, Derek, and Jason have been doing this for years, heading up to Derek's family cabin in northern Ontario, about 4 hours north of Thunder Bay. The kind of place where your cell phone becomes a paperweight and the nearest neighbor is miles away. We loved it exactly for that reason. Just 3 buddies from college who stayed tight after graduation, drinking beer, telling the same old stories, and hopefully bagging a deer or 2. This year was different, though. I should have known something was off when we first pulled up to the cabin. Usually there's nothing but pristine wilderness surrounding the place, but as we unloaded our gear from Derek's pickup, I noticed something strange about the tree line maybe 50 yards from the back of the property. It looked disturbed somehow, like something had been moving through there repeatedly, wearing a crude path. "Hey, you guys see that?" I asked, pointing. Derek squinted in that direction. Probably just deer. Good sign for hunting. I nodded, but something didn't sit right. Deer don't usually create such a defined trail in such a specific direction, straight toward the cabin. But I let it go. We were there to unwind, after all. The first night was normal enough. We grilled some steaks, knocked back a 12-pack between us, and crashed early to get up for dawn hunting. The cabin itself isn't much. 2 bedrooms, a main living area with a kitchen and fireplace, and a small bathroom with just the basics. No electricity except what the generator provides, and we usually only run that when necessary to save gas. We headed out before sunrise, moving to our usual spot about a mile east of the cabin, where we'd had luck in previous years. Each of us took up positions about 100 yards apart, close enough to communicate with bird calls if needed, but far enough to cover more ground. I was settled against an old maple tree, rifle across my lap, when I heard movement to my right around 8:30 a.m. Heavy movement, not delicate like a deer. My first thought was moose, but it sounded heavier than that even. Maybe a bear. I raised my rifle, peering through the scope in the direction of the sound. The brush was thick, but I could make out something large moving between the trees. Dark-colored, definitely large enough to be a bear. I signaled to Jason, who was closest to me, with our warning call for a potential bear. 2 short whistles. The movement stopped. Then suddenly the brush parted and something burst out, charging directly toward my position. Through the scope, all I could see was dark fur and what looked like the outline of a bear's head and shoulders. Pure instinct kicked in. I aimed and fired. The shot hit. I saw the impact as the figure stumbled, a spray of red in the morning light. But then something happened that still doesn't make sense. Instead of dropping or running away like any wounded animal would, it straightened up. It stood on 2 legs. It wasn't a bear. It was a man. At least it had once been a man. He was enormous, covered in layers of tattered clothing and what looked like animal furs stitched together with crude twine. His face was almost completely hidden behind a wild, matted beard and hair that hung down past his shoulders. But what I could see of his face, Jesus. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely feral. He had a wound on his shoulder where my bullet had grazed him. I hadn't hit center mass as I'd thought. For maybe 3 seconds we just stared at each other. Me frozen in shock, him sizing me up with those crazed eyes. Then he let out a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Not a yell, not a scream, a roar, like something from the depths of hell. I scrambled backward, fumbling to chamber another round, but by then he was charging at me. I fired again, but in my panic, the shot went wide. He was maybe 20 feet from me when another shot rang out. Jason had heard the commotion and come running. Jason's shot hit the man in the leg. He stumbled but didn't go down. Instead, he turned toward the new threat, giving me a chance to get to my feet. "What the fuck is that?" Jason yelled, his voice cracking with fear. "Run! Back to the cabin!" I shouted, already sprinting through the trees. We crashed through the underbrush, Jason right behind me. I could hear Derek shouting questions from somewhere to our left, then the sound of him joining our retreat when he caught sight of us running. "Bear!" Derek gasped as he fell in beside us. "No, man! Fucking psycho!" Jason managed between breaths. We burst out of the tree line about 200 yards from the cabin. I risked a glance back, and my blood went cold. The man was following, moving through the forest with unnatural speed despite his injuries. He navigated the terrain like he knew every inch of it, barely slowing as he pursued us. We hit the cabin door at full sprint, piling inside and slamming it behind us. Derek immediately threw the deadbolt while Jason and I pushed the heavy oak dining table against it. "What the fuck was that?" Derek demanded, his face pale with shock. "Some kind of, I don't know, hermit or something," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I thought it was a bear. I shot him in the shoulder. Jason got him in the leg." "He was still coming," Jason added, voice shaking. "No one moves like that after taking 2 bullets." We moved quickly through the cabin, securing windows and the back door. The place had always felt cozy before. Now it felt like a trap. Too many points of entry, too many windows. Derek pulled his hunting rifle from its case while Jason grabbed his shotgun. I still had my rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. "What's the plan here?" Jason asked, peering cautiously through a window. "He's injured. Maybe he'll just go away." "You didn't see his eyes," I said. "He's not going anywhere." As if to confirm my statement, a heavy thud hit the front door, making all 3 of us jump. Then another, not knocking. He was trying to break it down with his body weight. "Jesus Christ," Derek whispered. "Should we shoot through the door?" "No," I said. "We don't know exactly where he is. And we already shot him twice. He's still coming." The thuds stopped. Silence fell over the cabin, somehow more terrifying than the assault on the door. We stood frozen, listening for any sound that might tell us where he went. Minutes stretched into an hour. No more attacks on the door, no sounds outside. Jason suggested he might have succumbed to his injuries and collapsed somewhere in the forest. I wasn't convinced. "We need to get out of here," I said finally. "Back to the truck. Drive to town." "It's 20 miles to anything resembling civilization," Derek pointed out. "And we'd have to go outside to get to the truck." "We're armed," Jason said. "There's 3 of us and 1 of him." "We've already shot him twice and he kept coming," I reminded them. "I don't think normal rules apply here." As darkness began to fall, we formulated a plan. We'd wait until first light, then make a break for the truck together, covering each other as we went. The keys were already in Derek's pocket. We'd leave everything else behind if we had to. Night came, and with it, the sounds. First, it was just rustling around the perimeter of the cabin, then scratching at the walls, like he was testing, looking for weaknesses. We took turns keeping watch while the others tried to rest, but I don't think any of us actually slept. Around 3 a.m. during my watch, I heard something on the roof. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the wooden shingles. I woke the others silently, pointing upward. We all heard it, something heavy dragging itself across the roof, pausing occasionally as if listening for us inside. "The chimney," Derek suddenly whispered, his face draining of color. We hadn't thought about the fireplace. It was summer, so we hadn't used it, but the chimney was wide open. Jason immediately moved to the fireplace, aiming his shotgun up the flue. We waited, hearts pounding. The footsteps on the roof stopped directly above the chimney. We could hear breathing, heavy and wet sounding, echoing down the brick shaft. Then a face appeared, just for a second, peering down. Those same wild eyes catching the moonlight. Jason fired instinctively, the blast deafening in the confined space. The face disappeared with a howl that didn't sound human. We heard scrambling on the roof, then silence again. "Did you hit him?" Derek asked. "I don't know," Jason said, hands shaking as he reloaded. "Maybe." We barricaded the fireplace as best we could with the iron screen and piled furniture in front of it. None of us said what we were all thinking. This man, this thing, whatever he was, wasn't going to stop. Dawn seemed like it would never come. When the first gray light finally appeared through the windows, we began preparing to make our move. The truck was parked about 30 yards from the front door. We'd go together, moving fast, weapons ready. "On 3, Derek said, hand on the table we'd pushed against the door. 1, 2. The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning quiet. It came from the back bedroom. We all spun around, weapons raised. "He's inside," I whispered. Unnecessary, but somehow making it more real by saying it. We backed against the front door, forming a half circle facing the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I could hear footsteps now, slow and deliberate on the wooden floor. A shadow appeared at the end of the hall, huge and distorted in the dim light. He emerged from the hallway like something from a nightmare. In daylight, I could see him clearly for the first time. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall and broad across the shoulders. His clothing was a patchwork of what might have once been normal clothes, now supplemented with animal skins and furs. His beard and hair were matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. But it was his face that turned my insides to ice. His features were human, but somehow wrong, like something wearing a person suit that didn't quite fit. His lips were pulled back in a permanent snarl, revealing yellowed teeth filed to points, and those eyes, completely devoid of anything resembling humanity. He was wounded. Blood soaked his right shoulder and left leg, and there was a fresh wound on his face, presumably from Jason's shotgun blast. But he moved like he felt no pain at all. "Get back!" Derek shouted, raising his rifle. The hermit tilted his head, studying us with those terrible eyes. Then he spoke, the only time we heard anything resembling words from him. "Mine," he growled, the single word mangled like he'd forgotten how to form proper speech. Derek fired. The shot hit the hermit in the chest, staggering him backward. But he didn't fall. Instead, he let out that same ungodly roar and charged. What followed was chaos. Jason emptied his shotgun into the advancing figure. I fired until my rifle clicked empty. The hermit kept coming, flowing forward like a force of nature rather than a man. He slammed into Derek first, sending him crashing into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. I dropped my empty rifle and grabbed a fireplace poker, swinging it with all my strength. It connected with the hermit's skull with a sickening crack, but he merely turned toward me, blood streaming down his face, expression unchanged. A hand like a vice clamped around my throat, lifting me off the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Spots swam in my vision as I clawed helplessly at his arm. Through narrowing vision, I saw Jason drive a kitchen knife into the hermit's back. Once, twice, 3 times. The grip on my throat loosened. I fell to the floor, gasping for air. The hermit turned on Jason, who backed away, still holding the bloody knife. Derek was on his feet again, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. He grabbed a chair, smashing it across the hermit's back. The hermit stumbled forward, finally showing signs of weakening. Jason saw his opportunity and lunged, driving the knife into the side of the hermit's neck with all his strength. Blood poured from the wound in a torrent. The hermit reached up, grabbing at the knife handle, his movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. He took 2 staggering steps toward Jason, then collapsed to his knees. For a long moment, he knelt there, swaying slightly, those terrible eyes still fixed on us. Then he toppled forward onto the floor. We didn't approach immediately. None of us trusted that he was actually down. Derek grabbed his rifle, reloaded it with shaking hands, and pressed the barrel against the back of the hermit's head. The hermit didn't move. "Is he—" Jason started. "I think so," Derek said. I bent down, hesitated, then pressed 2 fingers to the hermit's wrist. Nothing. No pulse. We stood there, 3 friends in a blood-soaked cabin, staring down at the body of something that had once been a man. The silence stretched around us, broken only by our ragged breathing. "We need to call the police," Jason finally said. We drove to town in a daze, Jason nursing a broken finger, Derek with a gash on his head that probably needed stitches, me with bruises darkening around my neck. We reported everything exactly as it happened. The authorities found the body right where we left it. They also found his camp about a half-mile from the cabin, a crude shelter made of branches and tarpaulin surrounded by bones. Animal bones mostly, they told us. Mostly. They identified him eventually. A man who'd gone missing in the area almost 15 years ago. A hiker who'd wandered off trail and was never found. They said exposure and isolation can do strange things to the human mind. That people can revert to something primitive when cut off from civilization for too long. But that doesn't explain his strength. It doesn't explain how he took multiple gunshot wounds and kept coming. It doesn't explain the look in his eyes. I haven't been back to the woods since then. I can't even drive past a forest without my heart racing. Derek sold the cabin. None of us have gone hunting again. Sometimes I wake up at night, certain I can hear scratching at my bedroom window. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that sound again. That roar that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal, but something in between. I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since I got back from what was supposed to be my relaxing getaway, and I keep waking up in cold sweats, thinking I see camera flashes in the dark corners of my bedroom. I need to get this out somewhere because it's eating me alive, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of what happened to me. I've been working nonstop for the past 2 years at this tech startup in Chicago. 60-hour weeks minimum, constant pressure, my phone buzzing with Slack notifications at 3 a.m. I was completely burnt out. My therapist practically ordered me to take time off, saying I was headed for a complete breakdown if I didn't get away from everything. So I found this place called Whispering Pines online, a collection of cabins spread out around this gorgeous lake in northern Wisconsin. The photos looked amazing, all rustic wood interiors, huge windows overlooking the water, complete privacy. The listing specifically mentioned no neighboring cabins in sight and perfect for disconnecting which was exactly what I needed. It was a little pricier than I'd normally spend, but I figured my mental health was worth it. I drove up on a Tuesday morning. The rental agent had texted me the door code and directions, saying they used a contactless check-in system to preserve the serenity of the experience. At the time, I loved that idea. No awkward small talk, just me and nature. The place was even more beautiful than the pictures. Cabin number 7 was set back about 50 yards from the lake, with this perfect little path down to a private dock. Inside was all knotty pine and comfortable furniture, with a stone fireplace and these massive windows that gave you a panoramic view of the lake. The kitchen was small, but had everything I needed. The bedroom had this incredible king-sized bed with the softest sheets I've ever felt, positioned so you could watch the sunrise over the water without getting up. Those first few days were paradise. I'd wake up naturally with the sun, make coffee, and sit on the dock with my feet in the water. I brought books I'd been meaning to read for years. I took long hikes around the lake. I cooked actual meals instead of ordering takeout. My phone stayed off most of the time. I felt myself unwinding for the first time in forever. The cabin was the last one on the access road, with thick woods surrounding it on 3 sides and the lake on the 4th. I'd occasionally see someone fishing far out on the water, but otherwise I had complete solitude. The nearest cabin was supposedly a quarter-mile away, though I never actually saw it through the trees. Everything changed on the 4th night. I'd been sitting by the fireplace reading when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, like a quick flash of light reflected on the window. At first, I thought it might be headlights from the access road, but the cabin was too far off the main path for that. I got up and looked out, but couldn't see anything in the darkness. A few minutes later, it happened again. A brief, unmistakable flash, like someone taking a photo with the flash on. It came from the direction of the trees to the left of the cabin. My heart immediately started racing. I turned off all the lights inside and stood in the darkness, peering out the windows. Nothing but blackness. I told myself it was probably just someone hiking through with a flashlight, or maybe even lightning from a distant storm. But there were no clouds in the sky that night. I didn't sleep well. Every noise, the house settling, branches against the roof, the hum of the refrigerator, jolted me awake. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I spent the next day hiking a trail I'd found that looped around the far side of the lake. The entire time, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck? It was constant. Every time I turned around, though, there was nothing but trees and birdsong. I got back to the cabin around 4 p.m., exhausted but feeling better. I took a long shower, made dinner, and tried to get back into my book, but as the sun set, my anxiety returned. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see that flash again. Around 9 p.m., it happened. 2 quick flashes from the woods behind the cabin. This time, I was sure it was a camera. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been photographing me through the windows. I immediately turned off all the lights and grabbed my phone to call the rental office. But their after-hours message said they wouldn't be available until morning. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I saw a flash of light in the woods. I had no proof anyone was there. Instead, I decided to check if the doors and windows were all secure. As I moved through the cabin, checking locks, I noticed something on the ceiling in the corner of the living room, a tiny black object about the size of a button. At first, I thought it was just a smoke detector, but it was too small. I grabbed a chair to get a closer look, and my blood ran cold. It was a camera, a small wireless security camera, expertly hidden where the ceiling beams met the wall. My hands shaking, I pulled it down and examined it. It was the kind you can monitor remotely from a smartphone, which meant someone had been inside the cabin before I arrived, someone who was watching me. Horrified, I began searching the entire cabin. In the next 30 minutes, I found 6 more cameras, 1 in the kitchen, 2 in the bedroom, including one pointed directly at the bed, 1 in the bathroom above the shower, and 2 more in the living room, all carefully positioned to capture every area of the cabin. I felt violated in a way I can't even describe. This mixture of disgust, fear, and rage. Someone had been watching everything I did, every private moment for days. I was physically sick, barely making it to the bathroom before throwing up. As I was collecting the cameras, piling them on the kitchen table, I heard something that made my heart stop. The distinct sound of footsteps outside, crunching through the fallen leaves. Slow, deliberate steps, circling around toward the front of the cabin. I froze, listening intently. The footsteps stopped, then started again, closer this time. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen drawer and moved toward the front window, staying to the side so I wouldn't be visible from outside. I couldn't see anyone in the darkness, just the outlines of trees in the moonlight. But I knew someone was out there, watching, waiting. Then came the knocking. 3 slow, measured knocks on the front door. Tap, tap, tap. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. No response, just silence for what felt like forever. Then the knocking resumed, faster this time, more insistent. It wasn't just the door now. It seemed to be coming from different points around the cabin, as if multiple people were surrounding me. I shouted again, "I've called the police! They're on their way!" It was a lie, but I was desperate. The knocking stopped. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. Then suddenly, bang, 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 violent pounding on the back door, the handle rattling as if someone was trying to force their way in. Something in me snapped. I ran to the front door, fueled by panic and adrenaline, and flung it open, knife raised, ready to confront whoever was tormenting me. There was no one there, nothing but the empty porch and the dark woods beyond. I ran around to the back door, also empty. I circled the entire cabin, knife in hand, but found no one. Whoever had been knocking was gone, or hiding, watching me frantically search for them. That's when the realization hit me like a truck. I wasn't safe here. The person who installed these cameras knew I'd discovered them. They knew I knew, and they were letting me know they could get to me whenever they wanted. I threw my belongings into my suitcase in record time, not even bothering to fold anything. I grabbed the cameras from the table as evidence. The whole time, I kept glancing out the windows, expecting to see someone staring back at me. As I was running to my car, I swear I heard laughter from somewhere in the trees. This soft, amused chuckle that made my skin crawl. I threw my suitcase in the trunk, jumped in the driver's seat, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I sped down the gravel driveway, my headlights swept across the tree line, and I swear I caught a glimpse of a figure standing just within the woods, watching me leave. I hit the gas even harder, gravel spraying behind my tires. I drove straight through the night, stopping only for gas, constantly checking my rearview mirror. I didn't feel safe until I was back in my apartment in Chicago, door locked, blinds drawn. The next day, I called the rental company and the local police to report what happened. The rental agent seemed genuinely shocked and promised to investigate. The police took my statement and the cameras I'd collected, but didn't sound especially hopeful about finding whoever did this. They said they'd check if other renters had reported similar experiences. It's been 3 weeks, and I haven't heard anything substantial from either of them. The rental company refunded my money and offered a free stay in the future, which is the last thing I'd ever want. The police called once to tell me the cameras were a common model available on Amazon, virtually untraceable. I keep wondering who was watching me and why. Was it the property owner? A previous renter who kept a key? Some local who targets tourists? I'll probably never know. And that's the worst part. Not knowing who has videos of me in my most private moments. Who was standing outside my door that night? Who might still be watching me somehow? I've checked my whole apartment for cameras multiple times. I've changed my locks and installed a security system. I sleep with a baseball bat next to my bed, but I still don't feel safe. I don't know if I ever will again. So if you're planning a peaceful getaway to some secluded spot, take it from me. Check every corner, every vent, every light fixture for cameras, and maybe reconsider how much privacy you're actually getting. Because sometimes the more alone you think you are, the more eyes are watching you. I've been sitting here for hours trying to figure out how to type this. My hands are still trembling. It's been 3 weeks since it happened, but I still can't sleep through the night without jerking awake, convinced I'm back there, water soaking through my clothes, that horrible weight in my arms. I'm an artist, not famous or anything, just someone who's been painting long enough to make a modest living selling landscapes and commissioned pieces. After a creative slump that lasted nearly 6 months, I decided I needed to reset. Get away from my tiny apartment with its noisy neighbors and poor lighting. Find somewhere peaceful where I could reconnect with my creativity. I found this cabin rental online. Nothing fancy, just a small place near Crystal Lake, about 3 hours north of the city. The listing photos showed pine trees surrounding a rustic cabin with a deck that had the perfect view of the lake. The owner mentioned it was part of a small, scattered community of vacation homes, most unoccupied during the off-season. Perfect isolation without being completely cut off from civilization. When I arrived 2 Sundays ago, it was exactly what I needed. The cabin was simple, a main room with a kitchenette, a small bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower that ran hot for about 7 minutes before turning ice cold. The best feature was the wall of windows facing the lake, offering an unobstructed view of the water and surrounding forest. I set up my easel right there, where the natural light was best. The first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. I woke early, made coffee, and painted until my fingers cramped. I ate simple meals, took walks along the shoreline collecting interesting stones and pieces of driftwood, and slept better than I had in months. The lake was still, reflecting the sky like a mirror most days. I could see a few other cabins dotted around the lake, but they all seemed empty. Tourist season was over, and the locals had told me most owners only came up on weekends, if at all during this time of year. That Thursday started like the others. I was working on a painting of the lake at sunrise, trying to capture the way the light filtered through the morning mist. Around noon, I noticed movement across the lake. About a quarter-mile away stood another cabin, similar to mine but with dark green shutters instead of blue. A man was moving around outside. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably just another person seeking some peace and quiet. I went back to my painting, occasionally glancing up to study the way the sun hit the water. It was during one of these glances that I saw him again. He was dragging something from his cabin toward the shoreline, something heavy. I couldn't make out exactly what it was from that distance, but it looked like a large sack or bag, maybe dark blue or black. He was struggling with it, stopping every few feet to adjust his grip or catch his breath. I remember feeling this weird prickle on the back of my neck. You know that feeling when something just seems off? I put down my paintbrush and moved closer to the window, squinting to see better. The man made it to the shoreline and paused, looking around furtively. That's when my stomach first clenched with real unease. Why was he checking to see if anyone was watching? I instinctively stepped back from the window, though I doubt he could have seen me from that distance. What happened next is seared into my memory. He dragged the sack to the end of his dock, heaved it up, and pushed it into the water. There was barely a splash, just a dark mass disappearing beneath the surface. Then he stood there for a moment, wiping his hands on his pants, before turning and walking back to his cabin with purposeful strides. I stood frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. What had I just seen? My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was trash. But who drags trash to a lake and dumps it? Maybe fishing equipment. But it was too large, and why the secretive behavior? The worst possibility kept pushing forward in my thoughts, but I tried to dismiss it. That kind of thing doesn't happen in real life, right? Not somewhere like this. I paced my cabin for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. I kept returning to the window, watching his cabin for any sign of movement. Part of me wanted to call someone. But what would I say? That I saw a man dump a suspicious bag in the lake? I had no proof of anything sinister. Finally, I made a decision that would change everything. I had to know. I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen anything. If it was nothing, I could go back to my peaceful retreat. If it was something, well, I'd deal with that if necessary. I pulled on my boots and a light jacket, grabbed my phone, checking that it had enough battery, and headed down to the shore. My cabin had a small rowboat tied to a weathered dock, part of the rental. I'd used it once to paddle around the lake, enjoying the stillness of the water. My hands were shaking as I untied the boat. The lake was calm, barely a ripple disturbing its surface. The sky had clouded over, turning the water a deep slate gray. I climbed in awkwardly, nearly tipping over before steadying myself. I'm not an experienced boater by any means, but I could manage the short distance across to where I'd seen the bag sink. Rowing across the lake, I kept looking over my shoulder at the green-shuttered cabin. No sign of movement. Maybe he'd left? Or maybe he was watching me right now, wondering what I was doing. The thought made me row faster, my breathing shallow and quick. It took me longer than expected to reach the approximate spot. The lake was wider than it looked from shore. When I finally reached what I thought was the right area, I stopped and let the boat drift, peering into the water. It was clearer than I expected, but still murky enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet down. I realized I hadn't thought this through very well. How was I supposed to find anything in this vast body of water? But as I was considering my options, I noticed something dark below the surface, maybe 15 feet from my boat. I carefully rowed closer. It was there, a dark shape just visible beneath the water, not yet fully sunken to the bottom. The lake wasn't very deep here, maybe 8 or 9 feet. Without letting myself think too much about what I was doing, I slipped off my jacket and lowered myself over the side of the boat. The cold water shocked me, stealing my breath. I hung onto the boat with one hand while reaching down with the other, but it was too deep. I'm not a strong swimmer, especially in clothes, but I took a deep breath and pushed myself down, kicking awkwardly. The water stung my eyes as I forced them open, trying to see. My fingers brushed against something, fabric, I grabbed hold and pulled, using my feet against the sandy bottom to push upward. It was heavier than I expected, much heavier. I surfaced, gasping, still clutching the fabric. With a strength I didn't know I had, I managed to haul it toward the boat. Getting it in was nearly impossible. I almost capsized trying. Eventually I got it halfway over the edge and then rolled it in, collapsing beside it, soaking wet and shivering. That's when I noticed the zipper. It wasn't just a sack. It was a large duffel bag, dark blue with black handles, the kind you might use for gym equipment or camping gear. Water streamed from it, pooling in the bottom of the boat. I sat there frozen, staring at it, knowing I needed to open it but terrified of what I might find. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I reached for the zipper. It stuck halfway, and I had to yank it, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet afternoon. As the bag opened, I first saw pale fabric, maybe white or light blue. I pulled the sides of the bag apart further. I don't know what sound came out of me when I saw her face. It wasn't a scream. It was something more primal. Her skin was so pale, almost bluish, her lips tinged purple. Her eyes were open, staring up at nothing, wide with what must have been her final moment of terror. Dark hair swirled around her face, some of it caught in the zipper of the bag. She was wearing what looked like a sundress, now soaked and clinging to her body. I scrambled away as far as the small boat would allow, retching over the side. When I could breathe again, I fumbled for my phone, praying it still worked after being in my wet pocket. By some miracle, it did. My fingers were so numb, I misdialed 911 twice before getting it right. When the dispatcher answered, I could barely form words. "There's a body. I found a body. A woman. In Crystal Lake." I gave her my location as best I could, describing my cabin and the one with green shutters. "Stay where you are," she told me. "Officers are on their way. Are you safe?" I looked toward the green-shuttered cabin. Still no movement. "I think so. I'm in a boat. The person who did this, he's in a cabin across the lake. Do not approach the cabin or the individual," she said firmly. "Stay on the line with me until officers arrive." I don't know how long I sat there, shivering in my wet clothes, that horrible bag taking up half the small boat. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking questions I barely processed. All I could focus on was not looking at the bag again and watching that cabin for any sign of movement. When I finally heard sirens in the distance, tears of relief streamed down my face. 3 patrol cars arrived at the access road near my cabin. I awkwardly rowed toward them, my arms burning with exhaustion. The next few hours blur together in my memory. Officers helped me to shore, wrapped me in a blanket, asked me questions I somehow answered. More vehicles arrived, an ambulance, more police, people in plain clothes who I later learned were detectives. They took the bag, took her, putting her in a different bag, loading her into a vehicle. I pointed out the green-shuttered cabin, and officers approached it cautiously, guns drawn. I watched from the back of an ambulance as they pounded on the door. The man answered like he'd been expecting them, calm, expressionless. He didn't run or resist. They put him in handcuffs and led him to a patrol car. As they walked him past where I sat, he looked at me. I'll never forget his eyes. Flat, empty, like looking at a mannequin. There was nothing there, no fear, no anger, not even curiosity. He just looked at me, then away, as if I were nothing more than a tree or rock in his path. The police told me later that they found evidence of other victims in his cabin. Photos, trophies. They believe he'd been active for years, moving between remote locations. The woman I found was a hiker who'd been reported missing 2 days earlier. Her name was Eliza. I gave my statement at the sheriff's office, still in borrowed clothes, my hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. When they finally drove me back to my cabin, I packed my things in 10 minutes and left. I couldn't stay there another night, looking at that lake, knowing what had happened in those waters. It's been 3 weeks. The police have called several times with updates and more questions. They say I'll need to testify eventually. They've identified 3 victims so far, with more suspected. I haven't picked up a paintbrush since that day. The canvas of the sunrise over Crystal Lake sits unfinished in my closet. I can't bring myself to look at it, much less complete it. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, eyes open, staring at nothing. I see his eyes too, those empty eyes that looked through me as if I weren't even there. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't looked up from my painting at that exact moment. If I hadn't gone to investigate. How long until someone found her? Would they have ever found the others? Sometimes I wonder if he saw me watching him that day. If he knew someone was there, witnessing what he did. I don't think so. He seemed too calm, too methodical. The police tell me I did everything right, that I'm a hero. I don't feel like one. I feel like someone who stumbled into something dark and terrible by pure chance. The nightmares won't stop. In them, I'm always in that boat, opening that bag. But sometimes when I look down, it's my own face staring back at me. I don't know when or if I'll ever paint again. Right now, I just want to forget the perfect stillness of Crystal Lake, the weight of that bag in my hands, and those empty eyes watching me from a police car window like I was nothing at all. My wife Sarah, our kids Ethan, 12, and Emma, 9, and I thought we'd scored the perfect getaway. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at the accounting firm, Sarah was stressed with her teaching job, and the kids needed a break from screens and schedules. When I found the listing for this secluded cabin by Hickory Creek in Blackwood Forest, the price seemed too good to be true. The photos showed a rustic wooden structure with a wraparound porch nestled among massive pines. The owner, a guy named Martin, mentioned in his listing that the property had been in his family for generations, but they rarely used it anymore. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in early October. The drive through the forest was gorgeous, with fall colors just starting to appear. The cabin sat about a quarter-mile back from the nearest road, with a winding dirt driveway leading to it. The real thing matched the photos perfectly. Weathered wooden exterior, stone chimney, those tall windows that seemed to look out in every direction. The stream gurgled about 50 yards behind the house, and the kids immediately ran toward it while Sarah and I unloaded the car. That first day was exactly what we needed. We hiked along the stream, collected colorful leaves, and cooked hot dogs over the fire pit outside. The inside of the cabin was cozy, a main living area with a stone fireplace, a small but functional kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a surprisingly modern bathroom. Everything was clean but had that lived-in feel, with quilts on the beds and mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. We all slept well that first night. Too well, actually. I remember commenting to Sarah how deeply I'd slept, how I couldn't even remember dreaming. The second day is when things started to feel off. Nothing major at first, just little things. Like how Ethan said he heard someone walking around in the middle of the night, though we all insisted we'd been asleep. Or how Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit kept ending up in different places than where she left it. I figured the kids were playing pranks on each other, and Sarah thought maybe we had mice. That evening, as we played board games by the fireplace, We all heard a distinct creak from somewhere beneath us, like someone had stepped on a loose floorboard. I remember how we all froze, looking at each other. "It's just the house settling," I said, trying to sound confident. "Old cabins make noise." But it wasn't just settling. It was deliberate, like a footstep, and it was followed by another. Sarah suggested it might be an animal that had gotten under the house, which made sense. I grabbed the flashlight to check outside, walking around the perimeter of the cabin. I didn't see any obvious way an animal could get underneath, but I convinced myself that was the explanation. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up, and it made this whistling sound as it moved through the trees. Except sometimes. Sometimes it didn't sound like wind at all. It sounded like whispering. Unintelligible words just at the edge of hearing. I tried to wake Sarah to see if she heard it too, but she was so deeply asleep she wouldn't stir. On the third day, I decided to check out the basement. Martin had mentioned it briefly when handing over the keys. Just a small cellar for storage, accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen. I hadn't bothered with it before, but now I wanted to make sure nothing had gotten in down there. The trapdoor was heavy, made of the same weathered wood as the rest of the cabin, with a metal ring to pull it open. It creaked loudly as I lifted it, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs disappearing into darkness. The flashlight on my phone didn't penetrate very far, so I called up to Sarah to bring me the big flashlight from the car. The basement was low-ceilinged and smelled of damp earth and something else I couldn't identify. The floor was packed dirt, and the walls were rough stone. There wasn't much down there. Some old tools hanging on the wall, a few dusty mason jars on a shelf, a broken chair in the corner. I was about to head back up when my flashlight caught something odd about one section of the wall. The stones didn't match. Most of the basement was built with large, irregular stones, but this section, maybe 6 feet wide, was made of smaller, more uniform rocks, and they looked newer somehow, less weathered than the rest. "Hey, come look at this," I called up to Sarah, who was standing at the top of the stairs. "What is it?" she asked, not coming down. "The wall looks different here, like it was added later." I ran my hand over the stones, feeling a slight draft coming through the cracks. When I pressed against one particular stone, I felt it give slightly. Heart pounding, I pushed harder. With a grating sound, the entire section of wall swung inward like a door. I almost dropped the flashlight. Behind the false wall was a room. Not a storage space or a root cellar, but an actual room, maybe 10 by 12 feet. And what was in that room made my blood run cold. Chains hung from the ceiling, heavy rusted iron chains with manacles at the ends. Against one wall stood what could only be described as a rack, the medieval torture device. In the center was a wooden table with leather straps. The walls were lined with implements I didn't want to examine too closely. Things with blades and points that had clearly been designed to cause pain. "David, what's in there?" Sarah called down. I couldn't answer at first. My mouth had gone dry, and I felt dizzy. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sick joke. "David, it's nothing," I managed to say. "Just an empty room, probably extra storage." I don't know why I lied. Maybe to protect her. Maybe because I needed time to process what I was seeing. Or maybe because some instinct was screaming at me not to acknowledge what I'd found. I quickly pulled the false wall closed and hurried back upstairs. I told Sarah there was nothing interesting down there, just some old junk. As I was closing the trap door, Emma asked if I'd found her rabbit. She said she'd looked everywhere, and it was missing again. That night, after the kids were in bed, I told Sarah what I'd really seen. She didn't believe me at first, thought I was trying to scare her. But she must have seen something in my face because she grabbed the flashlight and headed for the trap door. I followed her down. The false wall opened easier this time, almost as if it wanted to be found. Sarah gasped when she saw what was inside. In the beam of the flashlight, the torture devices seemed to gleam with a sickly light of their own. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It has to be fake, like a Halloween setup or something for a movie." I reached out and touched one of the chains. It was solid. The rust came off on my fingers, but beneath it, the metal was cold and undeniably real. "We need to leave," Sarah said. "First thing in the morning. This isn't right." I agreed, but I also tried to rationalize it. Maybe it's just some weird historical thing. The cabin is old. Or maybe the previous owners were into some really creepy role play or something. Even as I said it, I knew these weren't props. These were tools that had been used. I could feel it somehow. We closed the false wall and went back upstairs, double-checking that the trap door was firmly shut. We agreed not to tell the kids, no need to scare them. We'd make up some excuse in the morning about needing to head home early. Neither of us slept well that night. The wind had picked up again, and the whispering sound was more distinct. Around 3 a.m. I woke to the unmistakable sound of the trapdoor opening. The hinges made a specific creaking noise I recognized immediately. I shook Sarah awake, putting my finger to my lips to signal her to be quiet. We both listened. Heavy footsteps moved across the kitchen floor above. Then silence. "It's just the wind," Sarah whispered, but her voice trembled. Then we heard it, the sound of small shuffling footsteps moving from the children's bedroom toward the stairs. Emma appeared in our doorway, clutching her recovered rabbit. "There's someone in my room," she said, her voice small and frightened. I jumped out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat I'd brought from the car that evening. Sarah pulled Emma into our bed and followed me to the kids' room. Ethan was still asleep, his breathing deep and even. Too even. I couldn't wake him, no matter how hard I tried. We searched the entire cabin, finding nothing. No sign of an intruder. But when we returned to the kitchen, the trap door was open. I know we had closed it. I distinctly remember the sound it made when it latched. I didn't want to go down there again, but I had to. Sarah stood guard at the top with the bat while I descended with the flashlight. The basement looked the same. Tools on the wall, jars on the shelf, broken chair in the corner. But the false wall was open. Just a crack, but definitely open. With shaking hands, I pushed it further, shining the light inside. The room was empty. No chains, no rack, no table with straps. Nothing but bare stone walls and a dirt floor. I felt a weird mix of relief and deeper terror. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? I hurried back upstairs, not bothering to close the false wall or the trap door. "It's empty," I told Sarah. "Everything's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" she demanded. "Those things were bolted to the walls." We decided to take turns keeping watch until morning, when we would pack up and leave. Sarah took the first shift while I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about those chains, about how they could be there one moment and gone the next. Around 5 a.m., just as the first hint of dawn was lightening the sky, we heard it. Footsteps again, but this time not trying to be quiet. Heavy, deliberate steps coming up from the basement, then across the kitchen floor, then up the stairs toward our bedrooms. Sarah and I looked at each other, frozen in terror. The bat lay on the floor where she'd dropped it when she climbed back into bed. I couldn't make myself reach for it. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. The handle turned slowly. The door began to open. I still don't know where I found the courage, but I lunged for the bat and charged at the door, swinging wildly. The bat hit nothing but air. The hallway was empty, but when I turned back to our room, Sarah was pointing toward the children's bedroom, her face white with fear. The door to their room was now open. I ran in to find Ethan sitting up in bed, still weirdly groggy. Emma's bed was empty. "Where's your sister?" I demanded. Ethan blinked at me slowly. "She went with the tall man," he mumbled. My heart nearly stopped. "What tall man? When?" "Just now," he said, rubbing his eyes. "The tall man from the basement." Sarah was already racing down the stairs, calling Emma's name. I followed, nearly falling in my haste. The trap door was wide open now, the dark hole gaping like a mouth. Without hesitation, Sarah disappeared down the stairs. I was right behind her, the bat still clutched in my hand. The basement was dark, except for the beam of the flashlight Sarah held. She was standing in front of the false wall, which was now fully open, and there was Emma standing in the center of the room that was no longer empty. The chains hung from the ceiling again. The rack stood against the wall. The table with straps occupied the center of the room. And behind Emma, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the low ceiling. It seemed to be wearing a dark robe or coat that flowed around it like liquid shadow. Where its face should have been was just emptiness, a void that hurt to look at. Emma didn't seem afraid. She stood there, rabbit clutched to her chest, staring up at the figure as if listening to something only she could hear. "Emma, come here," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Come to Mommy right now." Emma turned to look at us, but her eyes seemed unfocused, like she was in a trance. "He says I belong here," she said in a flat voice. "He says we all do." The figure behind her shifted slightly, and I felt an overwhelming wave of malice directed at us. This thing, whatever it was, hated us. It wanted to hurt us, to use those implements on the walls on us. I could feel its desire to cause pain like a physical force. "Emma, run!" I shouted, charging forward with the bat raised. The figure moved so fast it blurred. One moment it was behind Emma. The next it was right in front of me. A hand, or something like a hand, shot out and grabbed my wrist. It was cold, so cold it burned like fire. I could feel it seeping into my skin, into my veins, turning my blood to ice. Sarah grabbed Emma and pulled her toward the stairs while I struggled with the figure. Its grip was like iron, and where it touched me, my skin turned white, then blue. I couldn't feel my arm anymore. With every ounce of strength I had left, I swung the bat with my free hand. It passed through the figure like it was smoke, but the thing recoiled anyway, releasing my wrist. I staggered back, nearly falling. That's when I saw them, faces in the walls, dozens of them, pressing outward as if trapped in the stone, mouths open in silent screams. And I understood. The cabin hadn't been built for living. It had been built as a prison, a place to contain something ancient and evil. I turned and ran, following Sarah and Emma up the stairs. Ethan was in the kitchen now, still looking dazed. Sarah grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the front door. I slammed the trap door shut, but I knew it wouldn't hold whatever was down there. We burst out of the cabin into the gray dawn light. Without stopping for our belongings, we ran for the car. I fumbled with the keys, my right hand still numb from the creature's touch. Behind us, the cabin door swung open, though no one was visible. Finally, the engine started, and I floored it, fishtailing down the dirt driveway. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something tall and dark standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching us go. We didn't stop driving until we hit the interstate. None of us spoke. What could we say? How could we possibly make sense of what we'd experienced? We never went back for our things. We never contacted Martin. We just wanted to forget. But I can't forget. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up feeling that icy grip on my wrist again. The skin there is still discolored, a handprint of mottled blue and white that doctors can't explain. And sometimes I hear whispering on the wind, even when there is no wind. We're moving next month, as far from Blackwood Forest as we can get. I don't know if it will help. I don't know if we can ever truly escape what found us in that cabin with the hidden room. All I know is that something ancient and malevolent lives in those woods, and it knows our names now.